Welcome back. This is a place for quiet stories from the wizarding world. The paths canon never walked, the choices that might have changed everything. Here, we take a single moment and turn it slightly. We follow the consequences slowly, carefully, year by year. If you enjoy these long, immersive journeys into alternate magic, consider subscribing and settling in. Now, let's start. The hut by the lake is shaking with laughter and wings. An 8-year-old boy is sprinting across the Hogwarts grounds, trainers slapping damp grass, Fang baying at his heels. A hippogriff's great grey wing sweeps down, missing his head by inches, as he ducks under it with the easy instinct of someone who has done this 100 times before. Hagrid roars a warning from the pumpkin patch, but the boy is already skidding to a halt by the water's edge. Glasses askew, hair a black storm in the wind. This Harry is utterly at home in the one place he was never meant to grow up. What if Harry Potter never had a cupboard under the stairs because his first bedroom was a camp bed tucked beneath a patched quilt in Hagrid's hut? What if there were no desperate letters through the chimney because he never left Hogwarts long enough to need an invitation back? What if instead of being hidden in a Muggle suburb, the boy who lived spent his childhood racing the squid's ripples and learning which trees at the edge of the Forbidden Forest bite? On that same cold November night in 1981, Albus Dumbledore stands at a crossroads in the canon timeline. In one version of the story, he invokes blood wards and Privet Drive, trusting Petunia Dursley's reluctant protection. But because he is also headmaster of the safest place in Britain, there is another choice he could make. What if, looking at the ruins of Godric's Hollow and the name Rubeus Hagrid on his mental list, he decides that the castle itself will protect Harry better than any Muggle street ever could? This isn't a story about a softer world where danger disappears. It's about a boy who trades neglect and starvation for overcooked rock cakes, molting owl feathers, and a giant who thinks he hung the moon. It means growing up with a table that always has room for one more plate, but also with fanged frisbees on the floor and a crossbow on the wall. It means that instead of learning he is unwanted, Harry learns that he is, perhaps inconveniently, loved. So, let's explore what it means when Hagrid is not just the man who knocks down a hut door on a rock, but the man who opens his own door to a baby and never really closes it again. How does a child raised under Dumbledore's nose, waved at by professors in the corridor, and scolded by Filch for muddy footprints, understand rules, authority, and magic? How different is an 11-year-old who already knows every secret staircase, every ghost's mood, every howl from the forest? This changes everything. Not just the color of Harry's childhood, but the architecture of the war itself. A Harry who knows hippogriffs before he knows bullies, who calls the gamekeeper dad before he ever hears the word freak, will not walk into the stone, the chamber, or the final battle in quite the same way. One decision at a ruined cottage becomes a fault line that runs through every crisis to come. And in this version of the story, we'll follow that crack all the way to the end. Rewriting the first decision. Why Dumbledore chooses Hagrid. To rewrite everything, we have to go back to the beginning. Not the letters, not the Hogwarts Express, but the smoking ruin of Godric's Hollow and a baby with a lightning scar breathing in cold November air. Canon gives us a sequence. Hagrid on Sirius's motorbike, McGonagall watching the Dursleys all day, Dumbledore insisting on blood wards and Privet Drive. But what if the pivot isn't the prophecy, or even the Fidelius? What if the pivot is that silent hour on the garden wall when Minerva McGonagall listens to Vernon Dursley call wizards freaks and watches Petunia's mouth thin at the word sister? In this version, Dumbledore doesn't ignore that report. He hears it, weighs it against Lily's sacrifice, and hesitates. Because the blood protection is powerful, yes, but it is also fragile, contingent on a woman who has already called her sister that dreadful girl, choosing day after day to shelter the child who ended a war. One slammed door, one eviction, and the whole spell collapses. This isn't a story about perfect safeguards. It's a story about gambles. So he considers the other fortress he commands, Hogwarts, layered in ancient wards, guarded by enchantments older than the Ministry, watched over by portraits, ghosts, and a staff who survived Voldemort's first rise. Death Eaters are unaccounted for. Azkaban is porous. The Ministry is celebrating instead of securing. Politically, hiding Harry in a Muggle suburb keeps him out of sight. Strategically, hiding him in plain sight at the most heavily warded magical institution means Dumbledore can put eyes on him every day. This changes everything, not because Hogwarts is safer in every way, but because Dumbledore chooses oversight over distance, stone walls over brittle blood magic in a hostile home. The boy who lived becomes the boy who grows up inside the castle the Dark Lord fears. Why Hagrid, then? Because in canon, Dumbledore has already made that choice in miniature. He believed Hagrid innocent when the Chamber of Secrets was opened the first time. He fought to keep him on as gamekeeper after expulsion, bent rules to let a half-giant with a broken wand live on school grounds, and trusted him with the most precious cargo in the wizarding world on that first night. Loyalty in the war, unquestioning obedience, and a heart that goes soft around anything small and vulnerable. Dragon eggs, hippogriffs, first years. Guardianship isn't a stretch, it's the next step. We should also be clear about the trade he's making. In this timeline, Dumbledore accepts that Harry will not be wrapped in Lily's blood wards. Instead, he will be wrapped in castle magic, in Hagrid's massive arms, in a web of professors and house elves, and portraits who all know exactly who he is. Protection shifts from a single invisible spell on a suburban doorstep to a living network of watchful eyes and intertwined loyalties. So picture that street again. The quiet, the cat on the wall, the bundle of blankets. Only this time, when Dumbledore says, "Hagrid, give him here," Hagrid's hands don't move. Petunia's front door is 10 steps away and might as well be another country. "Yeah," said his mum died for him, Hagrid manages, voice rough. "Yeah," said he needs love. Dumbledore looks at the dark square of Privet Drive's window, remembers McGonagall's report, and makes his decision. "Bring him home," he says. And Hagrid, cradling Harry closer, doesn't walk toward the neat little house at number 4. He turns toward the motorbike instead, toward the stars, toward a very different idea of what home means. And the next morning, when Minerva McGonagall finds the headmaster's chair empty and the castle whispering about a baby in the gamekeeper's hut, the real consequences of that choice begin. Not a fairy tale. Stakes, risks, and the cost of growing up at Hogwarts. It sounds idyllic at first, doesn't it? No cupboard under the stairs, no Dudley, no locked toy box. Just a baby in a castle, growing up on warm stews in Hagrid's hut and bedtime stories about phoenixes instead of drill sales. But if we stop there, we're telling ourselves a fairy tale, not a what-if. Because Hogwarts is not a child-safe environment. This changes everything. Harry's first steps happen on stone floors. His first independent wander takes him toward the Forbidden Forest, and the adults in charge are not exactly a cohesive parenting committee. One overworked gamekeeper with a broken wand, a headmaster juggling the Wizengamot, and a prophecy. A staff of brilliant specialists, none of whom signed up to co-raise the boy who lived. Who notices when a toddler follows Fang into the trees? Who decides what's too dangerous when danger is literally built into the grounds? And then there's money. Canon Harry is poor in love, but rich in gold. This Harry is the richest orphan in Britain, being tucked into a bed 3 feet from Hagrid's kettle because his guardian can't afford a bigger place. We're talking 1 room, a smoking fireplace, a giant boarhound, and a crib squeezed between crossbows and ferret food. What does it mean when the goblins send quarterly statements for a vault Hagrid will never touch, while he patches Harry's shoes with magic and pride instead of galleons? How many whispered conversations does McGonagall have with Dumbledore about moving them into proper quarters? And how many times does Hagrid refuse because he won't be a charity case in the castle he already serves? Outside those walls, the politics are worse. The Ministry tolerated Harry vanishing into Muggle suburbia. They will not ignore Dumbledore hoarding the boy who lived under his own roof. Pure-blood families ask pointed questions. Why is a half-giant raising the Potter heir? Why is the most famous magical child in 1,000 years sleeping in a hut instead of in the ancestral home his gold could restore? The Daily Prophet does what it always does. 1 week it's a sentimental feature on Hogwarts' tiniest resident. The next, a scathing column about Dumbledore grooming a political weapon. Every photograph of Harry on the grounds is evidence in someone's argument. Emotionally, it's not simple either. This isn't a story about rescuing Harry from abuse and then wrapping him in consequence-free comfort. He is safer from the Dursleys' cruelty, yes, but he is never anonymous. There is no Privet Drive where he can, briefly, be the weird kid no one wants. At Hogwarts, his scar is a beacon. Every corridor is an audience. Every tantrum, every scraped knee, every childish burst of accidental magic happens under observation, by portraits, by ghosts, by students who will carry those stories home. So when we follow this timeline, we have to hold 2 truths at once. There is warmth here, real love between an awkward man and the child he would do anything to protect. But because that love unfolds in the most politicized building in Britain, every hug has a headline attached. Every choice has a cost. So, let's explore an AU that refuses to pick between comfort and discomfort, and see what growing up in the castle really means for the boy who calls it home. 2 Harrys, how upbringing rewrites personality and heroism. Canon Harry walked into Hogwarts carrying 3 invisible weights: deprivation, invisibility, and the cupboard under the stairs. He is wary because every adult he's known has been a potential threat. He is hungry for belonging because the Dursleys made him an intrusion, not a son. And his instinctive self-sacrifice, that terrifying willingness to die at 11, 12, 17, grows out of a boy who has been taught his life is worth less than the people around him. This changes everything when we imagine a Harry whose earliest memories are not spiders on the ceiling, but owls on the windowsill. Canon Harry flinches when adults raise their voices because shouting meant punishment. He hesitates to ask for seconds at dinner because hunger was normal. He breaks rules while assuming he'll be blamed anyway, so why not? This isn't a story about a naturally reckless hero. It's a story about a child for whom danger feels familiar and praise feels suspicious. Now place that same soul in Hagrid's hut instead of Privet Drive. A.U. Harry's emotional baseline is different from the first bedtime story. He grows up with a guardian who cries over him when he has a fever, who keeps his first toy broom in a place of honor, who tells him over and over that his mum and dad were brave and good and loved him. Before he ever meets a classmate, portraits are greeting him by name. Ghosts are floating down to check on the little lad, and house elves sneak him extra treacle tart because the boy who lived asked nicely. What does that do to courage? When the corridors are your playground from age 4, the castle stops being a maze and becomes a map of memories. Harry knows which staircases misbehave, which suits of armor gossip, which door near the kitchens sticks in winter. He is still curious, still rule-breaking. But it's the mischief of a child who feels at home, not an outsider testing boundaries to see where he'll be hurt. He doesn't need McGonagall's approval to know he belongs. He already belongs because Hogwarts raised him. This Harry steps into first year less desperate to prove himself to authority figures and more eager to explore the only home he's ever known with peers at last. He'll still chase the snitch, still argue with Snape, but the emotional engine is different. He isn't thinking, if I win, maybe they'll keep me. He's thinking, if I win, look what my home can do. And heroism? In canon, Harry walks into the Forbidden Forest ready to die, partly because he believes his death finally makes him worth the trouble he's caused. In this timeline, facing danger means something else. He isn't trying to earn love. He's trying to protect what he already has. Hagrid's crooked smile, the smell of wood smoke in the hut, the echoing halls that have watched him grow. So, let's explore the question that haunts this AU going forward. If Harry's courage grows from abundance instead of scarcity, does he become more reckless because he trusts the world to catch him? Or more grounded because he finally has something he cannot bear to lose? From scar to sanctuary, love, self-worth, and the core theme shift. Because that's the question, isn't it? If Harry grows up believing the world will catch him, what happens to the scarred boy at the center of the story when the world starts to fall apart? Canon Harry arrives at Hogwarts with deprivation etched into his bones. No birthday presents, no photos of his parents, no one saying his name with uncomplicated pride. He has been told he is a burden, an intrusion, an extra mouth at the table. So when Hagrid remembers his birthday, when Mrs. Weasley knits him a jumper, when Dumbledore looks at him with apparent fondness, Harry is stunned into gratitude. He will throw himself onto a chessboard, into a basilisk's path, into a graveyard, because somewhere deep down he believes his life is worth less than the people who finally chose him. This Harry, grows up hearing Hagrid brag about him to anyone who'll listen. First years get pointed out a grubby-kneed boy feeding Fang. That's Harry. Saved the world, he did. Professors who try to keep a professional distance still overhear, year after year, Hagrid's booming, unembarrassed love. Harry learns his birthday is an event, that McGonagall will slip him a transfiguration puzzle wrapped in tartan paper, that the house elves will sneak extra treacle tart onto his plate because Hagrid mentioned it was his favorite. He is not a burden. He is a responsibility people were glad to take on. This changes everything about his relationship to power. He is still humble. Hagrid makes sure of that with chores, mud, and the reminder that dragons bite. But he is not shocked by kindness. He expects to be cared for. When Dumbledore offers explanations, Harry doesn't lap up crumbs. He notices what's missing and asks again. When Snape sneers, this Harry can recognize cruelty as abnormal, not as the natural order of the universe. When the Order of the Phoenix frames secrecy and manipulation as, for the greater good, he has a living counterexample in a half-giant who has never lied to him about danger, only stood in front of it. Which means loyalty looks different. In canon, Harry's loyalty is fused with self-erasure. He will endure almost anything if it might protect his fragile circle of love. Here, loyalty comes with boundaries. The boy who has always had one adult in his corner is less willing to accept abusive dynamics just because they wear the robes of authority. He can say, "No, that's not fair." To Snape, "That's not enough." To Dumbledore, "I'm not your weapon." To the Order, without believing that speaking up will make him unlovable. So this isn't a story about a boy from nothing proving his worth by suffering. In this timeline, the emotional spine bends toward a different message. A boy loved fiercely by imperfect people can stand up to impossible darkness. The scar on his forehead is still a wound, but Hogwarts itself becomes a sanctuary that teaches him his life has value before the prophecy ever demands it. And once you shift that core, every major plot point begins to ring on a new frequency. What does the Mirror of Erised show a child who already has a home inside these walls? How does a Hallows tempted teenager weigh mastery over death against the very real, very mortal man who raised him? When we get there, the stone, the wand, the cloak, even the Horcrux hunt will all refract through this new understanding of love and self-worth. The question is, when the time comes to walk into the forest, does a Harry who knows he is loved walk in differently? Mapping the new timeline, how this AU walks through all 7 books. So if that forest walk is our destination, how do we actually get there in this new timeline? How do we move from a baby in Hagrid's arms to a teenager facing death, when Hogwarts has always been home and Hagrid has always been dad in all but name? This isn't a story about randomly cherry-picking moments and saying, he'd be happier here, or he'd be angrier there. We're going to walk the canon crises in order, year by year, and ask, what if, at every turn, the stone, the chamber, Sirius and the Dementors, the Triwizard Tournament, the Ministry Battle, the Horcrux Hunt, the final stand at Hogwarts, each of those isn't just a plot point. It's a pressure test for this Harry who grew up on the grounds. In first year, the Philosopher's Stone isn't a mystery discovered by 3 over-curious children. It's a security breach in the only home he's ever known. A boy who's been helping Hagrid feed Fluffy and has overheard staff arguments about the 3rd floor corridor will notice patterns earlier, push harder, and drag adults into the conversation in ways Canon Harry simply couldn't. That means different alliances, different suspicions, and a very different confrontation underground when the traitor isn't just endangering the school, but endangering Hagrid's boy. Second year, the Chamber of Secrets opens in a castle where Harry has known every ghost since he could toddle, and where he can literally map which walls shouldn't be whispering. Because he's Hagrid's, the accusation against Hagrid lands harder, earlier. It's not an abstract injustice, it's his family on trial again. That changes how loudly he fights, which teachers he trusts, and how quickly he connects Parseltongue, plumbing, and the forest's old stories about monster years. Third year, Sirius Black and the Dementors arrive at a Hogwarts that has raised Harry. The spectre of Azkaban hanging over Hagrid all these years makes the Dementor's presence personal before Harry even faints on the train. When he learns Sirius is after him, he's not a boy imagining a stranger in the dark. He's a child whose guardian has already been falsely accused once. That shifts his rage, his mercy, and the way he hears Pettigrew's name in that shack. Fourth year, the Triwizard Tournament drops international politics onto his front lawn. A Harry who grew up watching staff meetings from under tables and hearing McGonagall and Dumbledore argue about ministry interference will recognize exploitation faster. He may still be forced into the maze, but he walks in with a Hagrid-drilled respect for danger and a much clearer sense that adults can fail him publicly and catastrophically. From there, we follow the same rhythm. Fifth year's ministry battle with a boy who has literally grown up in Dumbledore's shadow. Sixth year's Horcrux hunt, shaped by a lifetime of castle secrets. Seventh year's war fought over the only home he's ever had. Through all of it, relationship shifts are our compass. Harry is Hagrid's son, McGonagall's unofficial ward, Dumbledore's visible responsibility. Snape's daily reminder of James, now sprinting across the lawn with a boarhound at his heels. So let's explore this as both story and essay. We'll move chronologically, but we'll keep stopping to ask, what does this mean for love, for loyalty, for how a child learns what he's worth? Because the wildest twist may not be in those early years at all, but in how the endgame looks when Hogwarts has always been home, and the final battle is quite literally a fight over Harry's own front doorstep. The price of protection, poverty, politics, and prejudice at the castle. If Hogwarts is home, then home is a drafty stone castle and a wooden hut that was never meant for a crib. This isn't a story about Hagrid suddenly becoming middle class because a baby arrived. The hut stays the hut. One main room, a bed built for a half-giant, a table that wobbles, a fireplace that does most of the cooking work, and corners already claimed by Fang's drool and whatever creature Hagrid is rehabilitating this week. Now add a cot jammed between the bed and the stove, tiny robes drying over dragon steak, and you start to feel the squeeze. Hagrid's income doesn't change either. He's still the gamekeeper, still paid a modest wage that assumes no dependence. He mends his own boots with speller-tape, stretches stews with bread from the kitchens, and quietly refuses every offer of a larger staff room, because Harry needs to be near the grounds, near him. Protection, in this timeline, means cramped nights, patched blankets, and a guardian who counts sickles before buying new baby blankets. And the castle notices, not just the warmth of it, the way Pomona slips him seedlings for free, or Madame Pince leaves picture books within reach, but the optics. When governors visit and see the boy who lived in a shack at the edge of the forest, what do they think? Some see rustic charm, others see scandal. A Malfoy in fine robes can glance from the marble staircase to Hagrid's hut and say with silky concern that it's hardly fitting for such a famous child. This changes everything for class and blood prejudice. In canon, Harry's Muggle upbringing is an embarrassment to purebloods because it's Muggle. Here, it's because he is visibly poor under Dumbledore's nose. The whispers write themselves. Dumbledore hides the Potter heir in a hut. The boy grows up half wild, half educated by a man they still call that oaf who was expelled. Pure blood families weaponize the image, boy who lived in a shack, as proof that Dumbledore is unfit, that Hagrid is dangerous, that old families should have been trusted instead. And over in London, the ministry frets. If Harry is at Hogwarts from infancy, what if Dumbledore is shaping him, day by day, into a political heir? Fudge can smile for photographs, but behind closed doors he asks, is the headmaster using school resources to train the most famous child in Britain to be loyal only to him? Every extra book in Harry's hands, every private conversation in the office, becomes, in paranoid retellings, part of a grooming narrative. Meanwhile, the Potter vault sits untouched. Gringotts' fees tick on. Gold gathers dust, while Hagrid quietly barters with the house elves for second-hand clothes and repairs Harry's shoes with careful, clumsy magic. This Harry grows up thinking this is normal, until he's old enough to understand what an inheritance means. What happens the first time McGonagall mentions the vault in passing, and Harry realizes his guardian has been poor on purpose to protect legal boundaries he never agreed to? So, let's explore the first crack. One evening, maybe Harry is 8, he pads back from the castle kitchens and hears voices through the half-open hut door. A governor, clipped and cold, calling him a charity case. Hagrid, defensive, rumbling that Harry's family now is Hogwarts. And Harry freezes, barefoot, on the threshold, suddenly wondering, if he is a charity case, what does he owe the man who saved him? And what will it cost to pay that debt back when the war finally comes to his doorstep? He's a Hogwarts boy, the quiet power of found family. Harry stands there, barefoot, on the stone threshold, that word charity case echoing, and Hagrid's answer hangs in the air like a spell that hasn't quite landed. Because what does it actually mean to say, his family now is Hogwarts? What if we take that seriously, not as a defensive growl, but as a thesis for his entire childhood? It means he never goes hungry. It means there is always a place at the staff table or a tray sent down to the hut. House elves quietly adjusting their rota to make sure there's an extra baked potato, an extra sausage, an extra mug of cocoa when the wind howls off the lake. It means he knows his birthday, not because of a letter from a school he's never seen, but because Hagrid carves it into the doorframe the first year, and Madame Pomfrey insists on annual checkups to mark the day properly. Potter, now sit still while I scan that ankle. It means someone cheers when he rides a broom for the first time. Hooch, arms folded but eyes bright. McGonagall pretending to be scandalized by Hagrid's unauthorized flying lessons, and then quietly scheduling formal sessions, since we clearly can't stop him. This Harry, grows up with applause in his ears instead of cupboard doors slamming shut. That changes how he hears his own name. Around him, the castle knits itself into an extended family. McGonagall becomes the stern aunt who will absolutely transfigure your boots into bricks if you run in the corridors, but who also slips him a tin of shortbread at Christmas and mutters that she'll have words with anyone questioning where he belongs. Madame Pomfrey is the overprotective nurse who clucks over every scrape from the forest, memorizes his growth charts, and files quiet, furious reports when ministry inspectors talk about experiments. The house elves, delighted by a child who thanks them by name, start slipping him extra treacle tart and whispering gossip about which portraits are the best for late-night conversations. Even the portraits and ghosts take sides. The fat lady boasts about our boy to visiting frames. Phineas Nigellus pretends indifference, but offers snide, tactical advice. Nearly headless Nick teaches him which walls will let you through if you ask politely. The Grey Lady, once he's old enough not to be frightened, shows him a silent, secret route to the library that even Filch doesn't know. He's not a lone chosen one haunting empty corridors. He's a Hogwarts boy, claimed in 100 small, domestic ways. And this changes everything about how victory feels. When he dodges a rogue bludger, or solves a riddle, or later, much later, survives a duel he shouldn't, the moment doesn't belong to him alone. It means Hagrid's pride, raw and overwhelming. It means McGonagall's shoulders finally dropping an inch. It means the staff trading exhausted, grateful looks over pumpkin juice because the child they raised together came back alive. This isn't a story about solitary heroism. It's a story about collective protection, about a castle that closes ranks around its own. So, let's explore that timeline properly. From here on, we're stepping into full narrative mode. Year by year, crisis by crisis, watching what happens when every danger, every triumph is filtered through one unshakable fact. Before he is a legend, Harry Potter is a Hogwarts boy, and Hogwarts looks after its children. Stepping into the story, a stormy night at the hut. So, let's step into this other October. Rain needles the roof of the gamekeeper's hut, a steady, impatient drumming that makes the lanterns tremble in their hooks. Fang is snoring in the corner, huge paws twitching, while on the scrubbed wooden table between a chipped teapot and a dented helmet, baby Harry clutches a stuffed hippogriff in both fists and refuses, absolutely refuses, to let go. It is late 1981. Voldemort has fallen only days ago. Hogwarts is in uneasy celebration. The great hall hums with whispered what-ifs and the clink of cautious toasts. But down on the edge of the grounds, Rubeus Hagrid is learning how to hold a bottle instead of a crossbow. His massive hands, so confident with bowstrings and boarhounds, shake as he angles the rubber teat towards Harry's mouth. What if he drops him? What if he feeds him wrong? What if this tiny, scarred boy is the one thing he cannot protect? This isn't a story about a neat, well-appointed nursery. The hut is chaos, pretending to be domestic. A blackened cauldron has been shoved under the bed to make room for a battered crib, its bars reinforced with transfigured broom handles. Enormous pumpkins, brought in from the patch before the frost, have been charmed into wobbling playpens, their hollowed centers lined with quilts and knitted blankets that all smell faintly of smoke and dog. Hagrid has overcompensated wildly. There are 3 mobiles hovering near the ceiling, stars, dragons, and tiny wooden hippogriffs, because if the room is soft enough, bright enough, maybe the world can't break this child the way it broke his parents. But because Hogwarts is a castle, not a cottage, the hut never really belongs to Hagrid and Harry alone. The staff come, one by one, on that first stormy week. McGonagall arrives first, lips pressed so thin they almost vanish, a parcel of baby clothes folded with military precision in her arms. She does not coo. She inspects the scar, the makeshift crib, the dragon-patterned blanket Hagrid bought on a panicked trip to Diagon Alley. Then she adjusts Harry's too large jumper with a surprisingly gentle hand and tells Hagrid, very quietly, that she will be checking in. Snape comes by accident. He steps into the doorway during a message from Dumbledore, sees the lightning bolt scar peeking from beneath a tuft of hair, and freezes as if someone has cast Petrificus Totalis. What does it mean to see Lily's eyes in a face that will grow up under the same roof as his old enemy? He says nothing. He leaves too quickly. This Harry is already a disruption in his carefully controlled grief. And Dumbledore watches all of this from the threshold, rain dripping from the brim of his hat, blue eyes taking in the cauldrons pushed aside, the pumpkins repurposed, the giant man curled protectively around a cradle. This changes everything. Not because Hogwarts can guarantee safety, no place in this timeline can, but because raising the boy here means every choice, every danger, will unfold under his direct gaze. Pattern interrupt. There is a flash of gold. Fawkes, in one of those rare, unannounced visits, glides down to the back of Harry's crib. Tail feathers spilling over the edge in a curtain of fire-bright red. Baby Harry lets go of the stuffed hippogriff at last and reaches, fingers splayed, toward the phoenix's tail. His hand closes on warmth and light. Fawkes trills once, low and approving, and does not pull away. In that small, impossible moment, Dumbledore makes a decision he never makes in canon. The boy will not be sent away, out of sight and out of reach. He will be a Hogwarts child, raised within the castle's walls and within Dumbledore's own daily circle. It means scrutiny. It means controversy. It means temptation. But it also means that from this stormy night onward, the headmaster of Hogwarts will keep Harry Potter far closer than anyone expected. Perhaps closer than is wise. Toddler in a castle. Harry's first years roaming Hogwarts. So what does it actually look like when the boy who lived learns to walk in a castle instead of a cramped muggle hallway? When his first wobbly steps echo off stone, not linoleum. A 3-year-old in Hagrid's oversized jumper, toddling down a corridor with one enormous hand wrapped around his, the other reaching toward a suit of armor that bows back with a creak. Portraits lean out of their frames to watch. A former Ravenclaw witch in starched robes clucks her tongue and gently warns, "Not that staircase, dear." It tricks first years, and the stairs themselves pause, almost offended, as Hagrid redirects Harry with a murmured, "Not thou one yet. Ye hear?" This Harry doesn't arrive at 11, amazed that portraits move. He grows up being scolded by a medieval monk for sticky fingers on the frame and waved through shortcuts by a laughing knight who thinks the gamekeeper's boy is excellent entertainment. The castle is not a mystery to him. It is a slightly eccentric grandparent that creaks and shifts but never feels hostile. And because Hagrid can't be everywhere at once, the staff begin, almost without discussion, to share the childcare. Flitwick, spotting Harry trying to jump from one flagstone to another, turns it into a balance lesson on floating cushions, one flicking as the boy wobbles and giggles 3 inches above the ground. In the greenhouses, Sprout hands him a tiny trowel and a pair of dragonhide mittens, letting him dig happily while she mutters about root rot and resilience. Madam Hooch, following a suspicious draft near the broom sheds, finds a 4-year-old halfway up the broom cupboard shelves and simply folds her arms until he climbs down, then lectures him on proper handling of school brooms as if addressing a very small, very earnest trainee. This isn't a story about a child hidden away from magic until a single letter changes his life. This, Harry, is soaked in it from the beginning, feeding hippogriffs from the cradle of Hagrid's arms, learning early to bow and wait, to respect the creature's gaze, trudging along the forest edge as Hagrid points out the clean, deliberate crescent of a centaur hoofprint versus the drag of a troll's step. At night, he falls asleep to Hagrid's rumbling voice, telling him about dragons in far-off mountains instead of princes in towers. It means that danger is never abstract. It has teeth and talons and names. Of course, not everyone is charmed. Filch mutters about the brat smudging the floors and threatens quite seriously, to hang him by his ankles if he tracks mud into the entrance hall again. Snape insists more than once in staff meetings that the child is not to be allowed near the dungeons, nor his storerooms, nor his cauldrons, nor, ideally, his line of sight. Visiting parents on school tours whisper when they glimpse a small, dark-haired boy racing after Fang. Is it safe? Is it appropriate? Is this favoritism? Is Hogwarts a school or Dumbledore's personal experiment? This changes everything, because the question of how to protect Harry is no longer theoretical policy. It's a small hand on the banister, a flash of green eyes in a corridor. And already there are pulls no one planned for. Picture him at 5, standing just beyond Hagrid's pumpkin patch, staring at the jagged line of the Forbidden Forest. The trees loom, branches knitting together, shadows thick and watchful. He doesn't know why he feels it. A tug in his chest, a prickle on the back of his neck, as if something in that darkness is waiting, patient and certain, already knowing his name. So, let's explore what happens when the forest starts looking back. McGonagall's dilemma: discipline, destiny, and a castle's child. The forest looks back, and Hogwarts does too. Because while Hagrid is the one holding Harry's hand at the tree line, there's another presence watching from a high, narrow window. Minerva McGonagall, who once spent a whole day as a tabby cat on a brick wall to make sure Dumbledore wasn't making a catastrophic mistake, is now watching that mistake grow. At least, that's what she tells herself it is at first, a mistake. Children do not belong in castles. Castles have moving staircases and vindictive ghosts and homicidal suits of armor. Yet, the reality is simple. Harry is here. And Minerva McGonagall has never been able to look at a child in her care and walk away. So the woman who terrifies generations of Gryffindors with homework schedules finds herself 3 evenings a week in Hagrid's hut with a chipped teacup, a stack of parchment, and a 4-year-old struggling to form the letter H. This isn't a story about McGonagall going soft. It's a story about her redirecting her severity into protection. She drills him on basic reading, then on writing his name without inky fingerprints, then on saying Professor instead of that bloke with the nose when he talks about Snape. She teaches him which portraits demand titles, which ghosts to avoid, how to hold a toy broom without braining himself. She corrects his grip on a crayon with the same precision she uses for a wand movement. This Harry grows up with please, thank you, and never touch a wand without permission, embedded as deeply as no magic in front of muggles ever was in canon. But the tension never quite leaves her shoulders. How do you treat him as any other future student when you watched headlines name him savior before he could walk? How do you insist on fairness when he is a war memorial in a jumper 2 sizes too big, living in a building designed for teenagers who can at least defend themselves? The answer for Minerva is rules. Bedtimes that Hagrid thinks are a bit much for the lad. Copying letters and numbers at the table while Hagrid feeds Fang. Firm lines about which corridors he may walk alone. When Hagrid wants to show Harry the Thestrals, she says absolutely not. When Harry begs to see the Forbidden Forest at night, her no is quiet, but immovable. And then there's the afternoon she finds him, Peeves cackling, ink bottles orbiting, Harry on a school broom he absolutely should not have been able to summon, skimming far too close to the Quidditch pitch. Her shout cracks across the air. The fall he doesn't take lives in her nightmares for weeks. Her punishment is swift and, to an outsider, harsh. No flying for a month. Lines about obedience. A formal apology to Madame Hooch. Harry's lower lip wobbles. Hagrid looks wounded on his behalf. Only McGonagall knows her hands are still shaking. This changes everything, because her strictness isn't distance, it's terror. It's the knowledge that if this child is hurt here, Hogwarts itself will have failed. Late one night, in her office, she looks at the future first years list and at his name, already penciled in. She vows, quietly, fiercely, that when his letter goes out, he will walk into the Great Hall as a student like any other. No special favors, no whispered prophecies. And yet she also knows, with the clarity of someone who has watched him race Peeves down a corridor and stare down the forest's edge, that the castle has already claimed him. The question isn't whether he'll be different, it's what that difference will cost them all. Snape's shadow, growing up under the gaze of old grudges. The castle has already claimed him, and it isn't just watching. It's judging. Through a hooked nose, behind a curtain of greasy black hair, from a shadowed stretch of first-floor corridor where Severus Snape stops dead because a toddler has just looked up at him with Lily's eyes. Not Canon Lily's son, arriving at 11 with a trunk and an owl. A barefoot 3-year-old boy in one of Hagrid's old shirts, dragging a toy dragon by the tail, who blinks up at him and smiles. What if the first time Snape really meets Harry Potter isn't in a classroom, but in that hallway, with no witnesses and no role to play except the man who lived when Lily didn't? For a heartbeat, he sees James. The hair, the tilt of the head, the easy familiarity with Hogwarts stone. Then the child squints, puzzled, and the expression is painfully, exquisitely Lily. This changes everything, not because it softens him, but because it hardens his decision. He turns on his heel without a word and walks away, deciding in that instant that he will avoid the boy whenever possible. But because Harry lives here, avoidance is a fantasy. You can't ignore a storm when you've moved into the sky. This Harry grows up hearing first year's whisper about the terrifying potions master, glimpsing a black silhouette at the end of the dungeon corridor that always turns aside when he comes near. Children chase what runs from them, so of course he becomes morbidly curious. He cranes his neck in the Great Hall to watch Snape sweep to the staff table. He lingers by the stairway to the dungeons, trailing his fingers along the cool stone, hoping to catch a word, a glance, any sign that this man who clearly hates everyone might hate him less. Instead, he gets silence. A slammed door, robes vanishing around corners. For Snape, every one of those near misses is a small act of self-preservation. He agreed to protect the boy. He did not agree to share a castle with a living reminder of his failures, of the night he carried Lily's body in his arms while Voldemort fled. Dumbledore's decision to keep Harry on site means there is no summer reprieve, no years of distance, only the constant grinding friction of grief against guilt. One afternoon, Harry sits on Hagrid's step, legs swinging, asking Professor McGonagall in a small, earnest voice what his mum and dad were like. Snape isn't meant to be there. He's cutting across the grounds, cloak snapping in the wind, when Lily's name drifts to him. He freezes behind the hut's corner as McGonagall's voice softens as she starts with James's Quidditch and Lily's brilliance. The boy asks, "Did they want me?" Snape's breath catches, anger flares at himself, at Dumbledore, at the unfairness of a question whose answer he knows is yes, and grief rides its heels. His boot scuffs the gravel. Harry turns, sees his face twisted in something he can't name, and only hears the barked, "Inside, Potter," before the door slams. To Harry, it's simple. Snape hates him. This isn't a story about misunderstood nuance. Not yet. It's about a child learning which doors are closed. And then there's the broom. Madam Hooch, persuaded by Dumbledore and worn down by Hagrid's pleading, agrees to a controlled experiment with a line of training brooms and one undersized, overconfident 5-year-old. Staff gather at the edge of the pitch, half amused, half terrified. Snape stands with arms folded, telling himself he's only there to observe an inevitable disaster. Harry's feet leave the ground. Not a wobble, not a shriek, just a smooth, instinctive rise. Wind in his hair, laughter torn from his chest, as though he's finally found the axis the world spins on. This will end badly, Snape mutters. Every inch the pessimist, every inch the man who has seen boys on brooms chased by bludgers and dark lords. But he doesn't look away, because if you're trying to protect a boy you can't bear to see, what happens when the sky itself starts choosing him and someone else notices? A different kind of famous, rumors, visits, and the Hogwarts legend. Snape doesn't look away, and he isn't the only one, because once the sky chooses a boy, the castle starts talking about it. Word doesn't spread through newspapers first in this timeline. It spreads through trunks and flue grates. Fifth years go home for Christmas and tell their siblings about Hagrid's kid, who can whistle for centaurs, and actually gets an answer. Third years complain that it's unfair, that some scruffy little boy is allowed to ride around the grounds on a giant boarhound, cloak flapping, while they're getting detentions for being out after curfew. They say Harry with the same mixture of awe and irritation you hear in canon when they say the boy who lived. But because they've actually seen him, the stories grow teeth. This isn't a story about a legend built in absence. It's a legend built in glimpses. A first year swears she saw him sitting on the steps of the astronomy tower at dawn, talking to a ghost. A Slytherin insists he watched Harry walk straight into the edge of the Forbidden Forest and vanish between two trees that definitely weren't there before. By the time those students' little brothers and cousins are old enough for their own letters, they already feel like they know him. And parents, listen. At feasts, visiting days, and Quidditch matches, the grown-ups crane their necks almost more than the children. You can imagine it. Some witch from a respectable old family nudging her husband, whispering, "Is that him, the Potter boy?" while pretending to be fascinated by the enchanted ceiling. A ministry clerk with ambitions suddenly remembers he has business with Hagrid, turning up at the gamekeeper's hut with a bottle of fire whiskey and a rehearsed line about Dumbledore's remarkable judgment. Others are less subtle, trying to slide questions about Harry into conversations with the headmaster as though they're discussing curriculum. And then there are the ones who disapprove, who sit in the stands during a staff versus students Quidditch exhibition and mutter that it's inappropriate, that the child is being put on display, that Hogwarts is a school, not a circus. They say, "Imagine growing up here," with their mouths pinched as though the very idea offends them. Harry hears his name anyway. He hears it in the echo of corridors when he turns a corner and conversations cut off. He hears it in the way house elves giggle when he walks into the kitchens, in the way portraits nudge each other in their frames. But because this castle is just home, because to him the Great Hall is where you spill soup, and the Forbidden Forest is where you don't go without Hagrid, he doesn't understand why the word Harry feels heavier in other people's mouths. Pattern interrupt. One summer afternoon, the Weasleys visit. Arthur is there on some pretense about Muggle artifacts in the dungeons. Molly arrives with sandwiches. The twins hang off the stands watching a pickup flying game, and there, below them, is the boy from all the stories, skimming the pitch on a school broom that absolutely shouldn't move that fast. Ron presses his nose to the railing. Ginny, younger, clutches the wood so hard her knuckles go white. For them, this Harry is myth made real. The boy who lives at Hogwarts, who knows Dumbledore, who rides with Hagrid into the trees. From their side, it feels like destiny. From his, it's just another afternoon. Until, walking past the stands, Harry hears a visiting witch sigh, soft and wistful. Imagine growing up here. He stops. For the first time, the thought flips. What if this isn't ordinary? What if the castle that has been his backyard is everyone else's dream? This changes everything. Not the facts of his life, but the way he sees them. And once a child starts asking what normal means, the war for his future shifts again. The letter that never needed to come. Reimagining Harry's Hogwarts invitation. Harry is 10 and a half when the question stops being abstract. What happens when you already live at Hogwarts, and the world's most famous school is just the place you trek mud into? By now, his days have a rhythm. Morning means feeding the hippogriffs, breaking ice on the water troughs, and racing Hagrid's stride as they cross the grounds. Harry's smaller boots slipping in the same ruts Hagrid's have worn for decades. Afternoons mean weeding the pumpkin patch, hauling crates to the greenhouses, and sneaking glances at the spell theory books Professor McGonagall has been forgetting on Hagrid's table. They aren't advanced basic charms principles, a battered first-year transfiguration primer. But for this Harry, they're doorways. He traces wand movements in the air with a stick. He mouths Latin roots under his breath, while Hagrid chats with Fang. He knows he isn't supposed to be learning yet. Not properly. But how do you tell a child who has watched magic every day of his life that he must wait until 11 to join the story? So he wonders, will anything really change? Will a letter arriving on his birthday mean more than new robes and a timetable, when the Great Hall's ceiling has already been his sky and the moving staircase is his playground? Or will it simply make official what his heart has quietly assumed, that he belongs here? Dumbledore, of course, knows the answer. And because Dumbledore understands that ritual is its own kind of magic, he insists on ceremony. The boy who lived will receive a letter, not by a quiet word in a corridor, not by Hagrid passing over a scrap of parchment after dinner, but by owl, sealed in green ink and wax, delivered to a crooked wooden hut at the edge of the lake. It's almost comical if you picture it, an owl flying past the owlery, past the towers, past the glittering windows of the Great Hall, to tap primly at Hagrid's window. A journey of a few hundred meters that, in another timeline, spanned worlds. This isn't a story about logistics, it's about what the moment means. Because when the owl comes, days before his birthday, because McGonagall argued for time to prepare, Harry's chest seizes. He has dreamt of this parchment. He has seen it in other children's hands in Hogsmeade on September 1st. Watched them clutch it with the awe of newcomers. Now it's here, and his fingers shake as he unties the string. Excitement hits first, sharp and bright. Official, a student, not just Hagrid's shadow, not just the castle's rumor. But braided through it is something quieter, heavier. The letter doesn't just invite him to classes. It implies a move from the hut with its roaring fire and mismatched mugs into the echoing stone of the castle as a first year sorted and slotted into a house that will claim him. Where does that leave Hagrid? Hagrid is beaming, of course. He puffs his chest out when the owl arrives, as if the bird has personally complimented his parenting. "Told ye, didn't I? Knew ye you'd get one," he says, even though there was never a question. Pride rolls off him in waves, but beneath it, there's a flinch he can't quite hide, a flicker when he says, "You'll be up at the castle proper then," and doesn't meet Harry's eyes. Because Hagrid remembers being sorted and then expelled. He remembers whispers about dangerous beasts and poor judgment. He knows that once Harry is in a house surrounded by peers and professors who grew up hearing legends, there will be opinions. About Harry, about the man who raised him in a hut full of fanged creatures and questionable tea. Will they think Harry's rough edges, his stubborn streak, his tendency to defend monsters are proof that Hagrid was unfit? Will they laugh at the way he says Hogwarts with the same reverence other children reserve for home? Harry doesn't have words for any of that. He only has the letter heavy in his hands and the sudden piercing fear that becoming a proper student means losing the only bedroom he's ever known. Thunder rolls over the lake, low and distant. The sky outside the window darkens as a summer storm gathers over the forbidden forest. "Do I have to move out?" he asks, voice barely above a whisper. The question hangs there, between boy and guardian, between hut and castle, between past and future. And the answer, whatever Dumbledore decides, whatever compromise McGonagall argues for, will decide not just where Harry sleeps, but what kind of family he believes he's allowed to keep. So, let's explore what happens when Hogwarts itself has to choose how to hold on to the child it already raised. Sorting a child of the castle, Gryffindor, Slytherin, or something new. The hat comes down on a boy who already knows the ceiling is enchanted. He's walked this aisle 100 times behind Hagrid, carrying crates of flobberworms, or leading a stubborn hippogriff. He knows where the floor creaks, which suits of armor gossip, which ghost will drift through that far pillar on the word Potter. But because tonight he's not the gamekeeper's shadow, he's the boy who lived, standing in a line of children who keep stealing glances at him, as though he's another legend nailed to the wall. Canon Harry arrived at this moment, overwhelmed by magic and awe, desperate for belonging. This Harry already belongs. Hogwarts is home. The Great Hall is just the big room where Professor McGonagall occasionally pretends she doesn't slip him extra biscuits. The nerves aren't about whether he'll fit in. They're about whether a single banner can possibly contain a child of the entire castle. The hat settles over his eyes, and the noise drops away. It's not surprised to find courage. There's the familiar Gryffindor streak, burnished by midnight trips to the forest with Hagrid, and a willingness to stand between a frightened creature and an angry professor. But there's more. A cool, assessing awareness of power, learned from hearing Dumbledore and McGonagall argue in low voices about wards and politics when they thought he was asleep. A comfort, with secrets, with passwords, with doors that open if you know how to ask. This isn't a story about a boy who has no idea what rules he's breaking. He knows exactly where the third-floor corridor really leads. He's watched Slytherin prefects negotiate with Filch, seen Snape wield fear like a wand, learned that survival at Hogwarts means understanding who holds authority and how to bend around it. Ambition isn't foreign to him. It just wears the face of wanting to protect Hagrid, to keep the only home he's ever known safe from Ministry interference. So the hat presses. Slytherin, it whispers more insistently than in canon, could hone that political instinct, that comfort with power. Imagine a Harry who understands influence from the inside, who could steer serpents away from war. Isn't that tempting? Isn't that efficient? But because he's a child of the castle first, house second, Harry pushes back. Any one table feels too small. He doesn't crave green or red. He craves vantage points, secret passages, the ability to move where he's needed. Where? He asks the hat without quite realizing it. Can I best protect what I love? Not just Hagrid, but the stones themselves, the forest paths, the house elves who have known him since he could walk. Gryffindor, the hat decides, not as an echo of James, but as a strategic choice. Courage, yes, but also visibility. From that table, under Dumbledore's eye, Harry can be both shield and signal. The brim splits. Gryffindor, and we cut to Hagrid in the staff seats, hands clenched, face split between a tearful grin and raw, terrified pride. Because this changes everything about what that word means to Harry. And we're only at the sorting. First year, second home. Meeting Ron, Hermione, and a very different Draco. Gryffindor means noise. It means cheering and pounding on the table, and first years being swallowed whole by a sea of red and gold. But one boy at that table is not lost. He already knows where the kitchens are. Canon Harry met Ron on a train, both of them equally unsure, both staring at the castle as if it were a dream. Here, when Ron Weasley stumbles into the Great Hall, ears pink, tie crooked, he doesn't find a wide-eyed legend asking how to get onto the platform. He finds a kid who casually warns Seamus which staircase, likes to pretend it's a slide on Thursdays, who tells a baffled Neville, very matter-of-fact, that the third-floor corridor isn't just forbidden, it smells wrong when the wind's from the east. This changes everything about that first, awkward conversation. Because when Ron finally blurts, "You're Harry Potter," he's not speaking to a stranger. He's speaking to the boy he glimpsed earlier on the grounds, laughing with Hagrid and being scolded by Professor McGonagall in the same breath. A staff child, a legend who already knows how to sweet-talk the house elves into an extra pile of sausages. The awe is still there, but it sits next to something else. Envy, curiosity, the aching question, what if you'd grown up here instead of me? Hermione's entrance shifts too. In canon, she's the one with all the answers. Here, she meets a Harry who can rattle off the difference between a hippogriff's bow and a thestral's, who knows that Peeves respects Filch's mop more than any prefect. This Harry can explain which portraits gossip and which ones actually listen. But when she tests him on basic spell theory, on the 12 uses of dragon's blood, on the precise wand movement for Lumos, his answers fray. Hagrid's storytelling and McGonagall's ad hoc lessons were full of wonder and gaps. So Hermione's reaction isn't simple admiration. It's frustration braided with fascination. How can someone be so at home in magic and yet so uneven on parchment? It means her first instinct isn't to dismiss him as lazy, but to organize him, to protect this strange, half-wild boy from the consequences of his own education. And then there's Draco. This isn't a story about a polished pureblood offering to guide a clueless celebrity. Draco has watched the Prophet's careful photos of the boy who lived at Hogwarts, heard his father's rants about Dumbledore turning Potter into a mascot for mudblood politics, to see Harry laughing with a half-giant treated as a glorified groundskeeper's ward. To Draco, that's not charity, that's sacrilege. So his first approach on the staircase outside the Great Hall is colder, more calculated. "You don't have to stay down there, you know," he says, chin tilting toward Hagrid's hut, the word there loaded with years of Malfoy prejudice. When Harry doesn't bite, Draco lets the mask slip. "My father says it's an insult, raising you with oafs and beasts. In canon, that would be abstract bigotry. Here, it's an attack on Harry's dad. The line is drawn in a heartbeat. Harry doesn't raise his voice, but his answer is flint. Hagrid's worth 10 of anyone who calls him an oaf. Ron hears it, Hermione hears it. They see where his loyalty lives before they've even finished their first day, and that loyalty is the bridge. That night, when curfew looms and corridors twist, Harry doesn't follow older students. He leads. He tugs Ron and Hermione toward a blank stretch of wall behind a faded tapestry of dancing trolls, taps the stone 3 times, and reveals a narrow, spiraling passage that smells of dust and dragon dung. "I'll show you the real Hogwarts," he says, grinning in the torchlight as the wall grinds open. We follow them into the dark, just in time to see that shortcut deliver them somewhere no first year is supposed to be. Lessons from the hut. How Hagrid's parenting changes Harry's skill set. They don't end up in the trophy room or Filch's office. They spill out behind the greenhouses, night air cool and wet, the lake a dark mirror beyond. And this is where we really see it. How growing up in Hagrid's hut has rewritten Harry's entire skill set. Canon Harry arrives at Hogwarts wide-eyed and underprepared, amazed that brooms can fly at all. This Harry, has been nicking Hagrid's old shooting star since he was 7, wobbling over pumpkin patches while Hagrid jogs underneath with his arms out. By 11, he knows the crosswinds that whip around the astronomy tower, the air currents over the forest edge, the exact moment a broom will buck when you lean too hard. So when Madame Hooch blows her whistle, he doesn't just take off. He moves like someone who already trusts the sky. That sane childhood means he walks the grounds the way other children walk their back gardens. He knows which forest path leads to the centaur's clearing, and which one sinks into the bog that nearly ate Hagrid's left boot. He's helped change bandages on a hippogriff's wing, refilled water troughs for the strahls he can't yet see, and watched Hagrid coax a terrified unicorn foal out of brambles with whispered apologies and sugar cubes. This isn't a story about a boy who discovers care of magical creatures in 3rd year. It's about a boy who has been quietly apprenticed to the gamekeeper his whole life. But because Hagrid teaches with his hands and his heart rather than with quills and ink, there are gaps you can't ignore. Harry's reading is serviceable, not elegant. His essays ramble, his spell work at first flickers, and spits where Hermione's snaps. He can gut a flubberworm without flinching, yet stumbles over Latin endings in charms. And in a school that worships parchment and precision, that imbalance stings. You can almost hear the snickers when he mispronounces a spell, McGonagall, just demonstrated perfectly. Pattern interrupt. Put that same boy in herbology, and the story shifts. One damp lesson, Neville reaches for a vine edging out of its pot, muttering that it looks harmless. Harry's hand shoots out faster than any spell. "Don't," he says, voice low, already tugging Neville back. Hagrid says the speckled ones burn. Professor Sprout peers closer, eyebrows rising when the plant gives an irritable hiss. It is dangerous. And the boy who lived just saved a classmate with knowledge he shouldn't, by canon standards, possess. Or picture a panicked school owl in the Great Hall, wing caught in a chandelier chain. While others gasp, Harry's already on the table, murmuring the same nonsense comforts Hagrid uses in the coops. The bird stills, lets him free its feathers. McGonagall watches, expression unreadable, as the supposed celebrity moves with the quiet competence of a junior caretaker. This changes everything about how he meets rules and authority. He's grown up with negotiated boundaries. Hagrid's not past the second clearing unless I'm with Yare. McGonagall's, you may sit in on Transfiguration prep if you finish your chores. He isn't cowed by professors. He's eaten stew at the staff table on stormy nights. But he also knows in his bones which lines are truly lethal, because Hagrid has walked him to the edge of them and said, very softly, no further. So, let's explore what that combination means. A boy who's clumsy with quills but fluent in danger. A child of the castle who can feel when the forest goes quiet. Those instincts, those gaps, will matter when the stone is hidden, when the chamber breathes open, when the darkest secrets of the grounds he calls home begin to wake. The stone in his backyard, rethinking first year's central mystery. For an ordinary first year, a three-headed dog behind a locked door is a shocking discovery. For a boy who's been racing Filch down these corridors since he could walk, it's a glitch in the pattern. This Harry knows the castle the way other children know their back gardens. He knows which staircases sulk on Thursdays, when Madame Pomfrey takes her tea, how Hagrid's lantern bobbing at the edge of the trees means he's late in from the forest again. So when a forbidden third-floor corridor suddenly exists where last term there was only a dusty trophy room and a portrait of a snoring wizard. When teachers who used to chat with Hagrid's boy about broom polish start cutting conversations short as he walks past. This changes everything about how quickly the central mystery of first year comes into focus. He notices McGonagall lingering longer at staff room doors. He notices Snape patrolling nearer Hagrid's hut than he ever bothered to before. He notices Dumbledore's eyes flick, just once, toward that new stretch of corridor when Harry comes up to ask about an injured unicorn. Canon Harry stumbles into the stone plot because of a troll and a bit of bad luck. This Harry arrives with a running list of anomalies he's already filed under something's wrong at home. And then there's Hagrid. In canon, Hagrid is the lovable adult who overshares with the celebrity child he rescued once. Here, he's daddish. He's the man who taught Harry to hold a bowtruckle gently and to respect the forest because it's older and wilder than any wizard. This isn't a story about a gamekeeper slipping up in front of a boy he barely knows. This is a guardian who keeps forgetting that the wide-eyed kid trailing after him now has a house scarf and homework and a stake in all these secrets. So when the dragon egg appears, it doesn't arrive into ignorance. Harry knows exactly what it means when Hagrid is jittery at the fire, when there's a crate he won't let Harry carry, when he mutters about a little project and changes the subject too fast. He's seen the way owls from shady corners of Nocturne Alley make Hagrid uncomfortable. He clocks that this egg isn't just a whimsical dream, it's leverage. Because he knows staff routines, the midnight visit to Norbert isn't a wild gamble. It's timed between Filch's second sweep and the moment the astronomy professor goes up to the tower. He and Ron pick routes that avoid the portraits most likely to gossip. Hermione doesn't just hiss about rules. She's calculating which teachers will be on which floors because Harry's mapped them for her over pumpkin juice. When Norbert leaves, Harry understands exactly how badly this could blow back on Hagrid's job, on the fragile respect the Board of Governors has for the boy raised by a half-giant on school grounds. The threat to the stone is personal, yes, but so is the threat to their life, to their family. So when he finally pieces together Fluffy, the traps, the break-in at Gringotts, it isn't only Voldemort he's thinking about. It's Dumbledore, and the choice to turn Harry's home into a vault and a battlefield. He goes after the stone, not just because the world needs saving, but because he refuses to let someone else's dangerous game burn down the only safe place he's ever known. And if he has to break every rule in the castle he grew up in to protect it, what does that do to his faith in the man who built the maze in the first place? Troll in the dungeons, boy in the corridors, a smarter rescue of Hermione. So when the troll comes, it isn't just a jump scare in a children's book. It's a stress test of an entire childhood spent in a castle that was both home and hazard. Canon Harry panics, guesses and sprints down the wrong corridor before luck and loyalty drag him into heroism. This Harry has been drilled. Hagrid has walked him through hypothetical disasters, the way other guardians walk children to school. If there's a fire in the greenhouses, go this way. If something nasty gets in, follow the staff robes and don't argue. So at the Halloween feast, Harry isn't just marveling at floating pumpkins, he's mapping exits. He knows which doors lead to staircases that move, and which lead to dead-end classrooms where Filch likes to lurk. He knows where the nearest staff passage is from every house table, because Hagrid made a game of it when he was 8. You can feel how growing up at Hogwarts means the castle is not a mystery. It's muscle memory. When Quirrell bursts in with his famous line, there's that first wave of noise, of fear, of 11-year-olds looking to adults. But because Harry has watched real emergencies on the grounds, escaped creatures, a hippogriff in a mood, a storm that nearly tore the greenhouses open, he doesn't freeze, he watches. McGonagall and Flitwick move one way, Snape another. Dumbledore's gaze snaps toward the dungeons. Patterns, routes, priorities. And Harry realizes something horrifying faster than in canon. The prefects are sweeping the main corridors. The Great Hall is being locked down. But the side bathrooms, the forgotten corners, no one has eyes there. Hermione had left the feast upset. Harry knows where an overachieving first year would go to cry in peace. He leans toward Ron, low and urgent. Hermione, second-floor girls' bathroom, not on the main sweep. Ron doesn't argue, because this isn't a story about reckless Gryffindor glory. It's about trust, built on years of Harry knowing which forest paths are safe and which centaurs to avoid. Harry doesn't drag Ron into the obvious corridor. He cuts right through a tapestry that hides a narrow service passage most first years won't discover for months. He's used it to help Hagrid haul crates from the kitchens. He knows where it spits them out, 2 turns from the bathroom where Hermione is cornered in this timeline. The encounter with the troll is still desperate, still terrifying, but it's not blind. Harry remembers Hagrid's advice about large, thick-skulled creatures. Don't try to outmuscle them, out-distract them. Noise, light, movement away from the vulnerable target. He shouts, throws a bit of broken pipe at the far wall, deliberately echoes sound down the corridor to pull the troll's gaze. Ron, given clear instructions instead of panicked yelling, manages the levitation charm not just through luck, but because Harry buys him seconds and space. Hermione sees all of this. Not just the bravery, but the competence, the way Harry moves through Hogwarts as if the floor plan lives under his skin. It changes how she reads him. He isn't just the famous boy who lived. In the micropolitics of first-year life, he becomes the boy who knows where everything is, who understands the castle better than any map. This changes everything about their trio dynamic. Hermione's respect shifts from grudging to almost academic. She starts asking him where hidden staircases go, which portraits gossip, how the wards feel during a storm. She treats him as an expert witness on Hogwarts itself, while Ron quietly recognizes that the instincts he's trusted since childhood now have external proof. And when McGonagall finds them, her fury is real. Points lost, voices raised, the full weight of a head of house who nearly lost 3 students. But beneath the anger is something colder. The way Harry stands there, breathing hard, and explains the shortcut. The bathroom, the distraction as if walking her through a well-rehearsed drill. He talks about danger with the flat practicality of someone who has met it before. She sends them away with detention and a lecture. But later, alone, she has to ask herself a question we rarely sit with in canon. What does it mean that an 11-year-old navigated a troll attack by leaning on survival habits he learned long before he ever had a timetable? And if Hogwarts has already been Harry's battlefield, what will it look like when the war finally comes inside its walls? Mirror of Erised, child of abundance. What Harry sees now, if Hogwarts has already been his battlefield. What happens the first time it offers him a ghost of what he's lost instead of another threat to survive? Not a troll, not a 3-headed dog, a mirror. We keep the bones of canon, Harry wandering the castle at night, breath frosting in the air, castle stones holding their own secrets. But because this Harry grew up in Hagrid's hut instead of a cupboard, the path that brings him there feels different. He isn't shivering in a too-big borrowed jumper, dazzled by corridors he barely knows. He's moving through a familiar maze, barefoot confident, slipping past Mrs. Norris with the ease of someone who's dodged her since he was 6. He doesn't have an invisibility cloak. He has something stranger, the quiet assumption that Hogwarts is his home, and homes have corners you haven't explored yet. So when he ducks into that unused classroom and sees the Mirror of Erised for the first time, we still get the same sharp intake of breath. His parents are there, James ruffling his hair, Lily's eyes bright and wet. Canon gives us an 11-year-old who has never seen himself reflected in anyone's face before. The scene lands as a revelation of belonging. Here, the revelation is more complicated. Harry has been held, he has been scolded and fussed over and fed second helpings by Hagrid and McGonagall and Pomfrey. Love is not hypothetical. This isn't a story about a boy who only wants any family. It's about a boy who suddenly wants both. Watch how the image shifts. At first, it's just his parents and him. Then, as he stares, Hagrid edges into the frame, awkward in his moleskin coat, Lily laughing as James claps him on the back. McGonagall appears at Lily's shoulder, lips thin, but eyes soft. There's a plate of rock cakes that no one is quite brave enough to eat. The mirror is not offering Harry an escape from his current life. It's offering integration, a timeline where the Potters and the people who raised him share the same cramped space. What if your deepest longing isn't to be loved, but to have the ones who died see the life their absence created? To have them understand why Hagrid's hut smells like smoke and treacle, why the gamekeeper's rough hands are the ones that steadied your first broom. That changes his obsession. He still returns. Of course he does. He sits cross-legged on the cold floor, watching James and Hagrid argue cheerfully about Quidditch, imagining Lily and McGonagall trading teaching stories. But the ache isn't, if only someone wanted me. It's, if only they could see this. If only they knew I was all right. If only they could thank Hagrid. So when Dumbledore appears and delivers that familiar warning about the danger of dreams and forgetting to live, it lands harder. Harry hears the subtext we often glide past in canon. You have this life because I chose it. Because I decided Hogwarts would be your childhood. He doesn't argue. He asks questions. Did you know I'd see them? Did you ever wish they could meet Hagrid? McGonagall? There's a flicker. Guilt. Pride. Something older. In Dumbledore's eyes that Harry files away for later. One more mystery about the man who has been headmaster and quiet architect of his fate. And when Harry walks away from the mirror, he doesn't vow to return. He vows, in that fierce, private way children do, to protect the family he actually has. If he can't bring his parents into this world, then he will keep Hagrid and the castle and the fragile peace they've built safe for as long as he can. Which means when the next secret inside Hogwarts starts to stir, Harry won't just be chasing a mystery. He'll be defending his home. And that shift, as we'll see, changes everything. Through the traps with a local guide, the stone's final gauntlet. By the time the third corridor on the right-hand side of the third floor landing is blocked off for maintenance, Harry has already mapped 3 other detours and clocked every teacher who lingers there. Too long. McGonagall's brisk, irritated. Snape's silkily curious. Quirrell is nervous in a way that has nothing to do with his stammer. And then Hagrid, over tea and rock cakes, mentions Gringotts' business, in the same breath as Dumbledore's been awful busy this term. And Harry's quill freezes halfway through a doodle of the castle. This isn't a story about a boy stumbling into danger by accident. This Harry has watched Dumbledore vanish to London, has watched the staff close ranks, has watched the third floor become a no-man's land in his own home. So when he tells Ron and Hermione, someone inside is after whatever they moved from Gringotts, it isn't a wild guess. It's a conclusion. What if the boy who lived grew up analyzing staff patrol patterns the way other children learn bus timetables? What if he's been quietly cataloguing which portraits gossip, which staircases sulk, which keys Filch actually guards, and which he only rattles for effect? Their preparation reflects that. Harry spreads parchment across a table in the library and sketches the lower levels from memory, where the air goes cold, where the stone sweats, where he and Hagrid once hauled a crate of flobberworms past a door that hummed with spells. Hermione doesn't roll her eyes. She cross-references his rough map with everything she can find on standard defensive enchantments, muttering about Flitwick's dueling days and Dumbledore's fondness for layered wards. Ron, raised on chess and brothers, starts talking through formations, who should go first into a room with unknown ground, how you treat moving obstacles as living pieces on a board. When they reach Fluffy, Harry knows exactly how far they can push it. He snuck past that door before with Hagrid, seen the 3 heads droop at 2 in the morning and snap awake at the slightest metallic clink. He times their entry to the dog's natural rest cycle, knows how loudly the harp can play before Fluffy shifts from drowsy to suspicious. It means less panic, less scrambling, more calculated risk. Devil's snare. Harry has helped Hagrid wrestle enchanted vines off a snared Kneasel. Sprout's signature is all over the plant. He can hear her lecturing first years about don't thrash and don't assume the obvious spell is the right one. Hermione shines because he nudges her toward the answer she already half knows, framing the plant not as a puzzle in a book, but as something grown by a teacher they both understand. Through every trap, that insider edge shows. Wind keys are easier when you've watched Flitwick charm decorations for a decade, and know he can't resist adding a telltale wobble. The chessboard is less shocking when Harry recognizes McGonagall's fondness for elegant, ruthless logic. Even the potion riddle feels like a private conversation with Snape. Harry has seen those exact, precise turns of phrase in detentions, but because he's grown up here, the risk cuts deeper. He isn't just facing expulsion. If they're caught, Hagrid's guardianship becomes a political scandal, the experiment that failed. The Ministry swoops in. The fragile legitimacy of his entire upbringing, this wild what-if in the wizarding timeline, crumbles. He could be taken from the only family he's chosen. So when Harry steps through the final door to face Quirrell, he carries more than Gryffindor bravado. He carries the quiet fury of someone who has watched his home turned into a chessboard by adults who should protect it. This changes everything, because from this moment on, the war isn't abstract prophecy, it's personal. And the boy walking into that chamber is not Canon's isolated child. He's Hagrid's son in all but name, ready to defend the castle that raised him. So, let's explore what happens when the first real battle for Hogwarts begins in the heart of its own defenses. Year 2, same forest, the Chamber of Secrets with a creature-savvy Harry. Year 2 begins with a betrayal, at least in Harry's bones. 2 tight months in Privet Drive, parchment-thin legal visit to blood relatives to keep certain protections satisfied, and then, finally, the sight of the turrets over the lake again. He comes back to Hogwarts with Dudley's whining still in his ears, but even more certain that the only place he has ever really been a child is in Hagrid's hut and the shadow of these walls. So when the whispering starts, it feels personal. In canon, the voice in the walls is eerie because Harry doesn't understand Hogwarts yet. Here, it's an intrusion into a home he has catalogued since he could toddle. He knows which pipes gurgle because of merpeople, which toilets moan because Myrtle is in a mood, which portraits gossip about which secret staircase. When something speaks that none of the ghosts recognize, when even Peeves goes quiet and cocks his head, this Harry hears it as a threat crossing his own threshold. This isn't a story about a boy stumbling into danger by accident. It's about a boy who has spent his life listening to the castle breathe, suddenly realizing that there's a new rhythm in the plumbing, a predator's hiss, riding the steam. He quizzes Myrtle about old floods and broken porcelain. He listens in on the house elves when they complain about blocked drains and nasty magic in the lower pipes. He trails nearly headless Nick through forgotten service corridors, mapping echoes. Because he knows the castle, every wrong sound is a clue. And threaded through all of this is Aragog. In this timeline, Hagrid hasn't kept his old friend entirely in the dark. There have been half-finished stories over tea, warnings not to go too deep on certain nights. A distant glint of many eyes when Harry and Hagrid skirt the far webs at the forest's edge. So when the trail of the chamber leads back to Hagrid again, the accusation doesn't land on blank terror. It lands on a name Harry already knows. Going to Aragog isn't a mad dash into the unknown. It's a calculated trespass into someone else's territory. He walks into the forest, understanding what it means to cross a predator's hunting lines, what deference looks like to a creature that is not a pet, but a sovereign danger. He bargains with respect, not bravado, And because he can read the twitch of a leg and the shift of a web, he realizes something crucial. The monster from 50 years ago and the monster now are the same. Ancient, directed, not loose. This changes everything. It means he's not hunting a stray beast. He's hunting a weapon someone is aiming. The list of suspects narrows fast when you grow up knowing which adults love this castle and which only tolerate it. The heir of Slytherin can't just be a legend when the pipes themselves are being used as veins. By the time Ginny disappears, Harry isn't guessing. He's following a map of murmurs, moisture, and fear down into the bowels of the school. And we leave him there, hand on the cold, serpentine door, Hagrid's lessons in creature speech burning in his throat, realizing that this time the monster isn't out in the wild forest. It's coiled in the bones of his home, and to save Ginny, he has to speak to it. He has to open the chamber. Hagrid on trial, Harry on the warpath. Ministry interference hits home. He has to open the chamber. But before he can, the adults close a door of their own. Canon gives us the horror of Hagrid being marched off to Azkaban as a tragic staffing decision, a cruel precaution. Here, it lands as something else entirely. This isn't a story about a beloved but expendable gamekeeper being sidelined. This is a child welfare crisis in real time, because the man the Ministry is shackling is the only father Harry has ever known. Picture the hut when Fudge arrives. In canon, it's tense, unfair, humiliating. In this timeline, it's that and something worse. It's a home invasion. Harry's mug on the table, the knitted blanket Molly sent for Christmas. Fang pressed against Harry's leg, whining, because even the boarhound understands that the heir has gone wrong. Fudge doesn't look at any of that. He looks at Hagrid the way you might look at a broken tool, useful once, now inconvenient. He talks about public confidence and decisive action, and you understand, of course, and every phrase means the same thing. You are disposable. You will protect our image with your freedom, and Harry is there for all of it. This Harry doesn't have to imagine Azkaban. He's heard Hagrid's muttered nightmares when the fire burns low. He knows about the cold that isn't weather, the way the world goes grey. So when Fudge says, purely a temporary measure, Harry's hands are already shaking, not just with fear, but with a fury that feels too big for his 11-year-old body. He tries to speak up in the hut and gets talked over. Later, he tries again where he thinks it will matter. McGonagall's office first, voice cracking, insisting that Hagrid would never endanger students, that he's the one who walks the grounds at night to protect them. McGonagall believes Hagrid is innocent. She truly does. But because she is deputy headmistress, because she has seen the Ministry at its worst, she tells Harry to stay out of it, to let the adults handle it, to focus on his studies. Then Dumbledore. Harry corners him in the corridor after the board suspends him. This changes everything, Harry thinks, because if even Dumbledore can be removed, then no one is safe. He begs, he argues, he throws Hagrid's loyalty in Dumbledore's face. He's always done what you asked. You can't just let them take him. He's my dad. Dumbledore's eyes are very old. He doesn't deny it. That might be the worst part. He simply says that there are forces beyond his reach, that the best way to help Hagrid is to remain alive, remain in school, remain quiet. Harry walks away understanding something Canon Harry doesn't learn until the Triwizard Tournament. The Ministry will sacrifice the vulnerable to protect itself. And Dumbledore's power has sharp, painful limits. So, let's explore what that does to an 11-year-old. It means when Harry stands in front of the Serpentine door, he isn't just chasing a mystery. He is on the warpath, finding the real culprit, killing the monster, clearing Hagrid's name. This isn't abstract justice. It's the only way to get his dad back. Into the chamber, basilisk, Parseltongue, and a different kind of courage. He goes down like a hunter, not a lost child. Canon Harry stumbles into the chamber on adrenaline and instinct, brave because he has nothing to lose. This Harry has spent a decade moving through the Forbidden Forest with Hagrid, reading broken twigs and claw marks, learning that the difference between awe and death is whether you notice the silence before the pounce. So when he and Ron and Lockhart reach the exposed pipe, Harry is already cataloguing threats. Damp stone, the echo of dripping far away. No scurrying rats, no flutter of bats, a predator's corridor. He sends Ron back with Lockhart after the cave-in, but not just because the plot demands it. He's doing what Hagrid taught him: minimize liabilities, protect your team, keep the path home open. He tests each step on the slick floor, wand low, eyes tracking for shed skin, for feather, for any sign that something this big has passed recently. When he sees the basilisk's discarded skin, he doesn't just gape. He measures width, age of the molt, direction of travel. It's a warpath, but it's also field work. And then the Parseltongue. In this timeline, the first time he heard himself hissing back at a grass snake by the pumpkin patch, he ran to Hagrid in a panic. Not because he thought he was evil, but because being different at Hogwarts has consequences Hagrid knows too well. Dumbledore explained what it was. Hagrid promised it didn't make him bad. But the way Snape's eyes narrowed in staff meetings when the word Slytherin came up, the way older students whispered about dark wizards and snakes, that lodged deep. So when he faces the Serpentine door, the language doesn't shock him, it condemns him. Every syllable feels like stepping closer to the thing people are already half afraid he might become. This isn't a story about a boy discovering a new power. It's about a boy choosing what that power means. He uses Parseltongue anyway, because Ginny is on the other side. And family comes first. Ginny, in this version, isn't just Ron's little sister with a crush. She's the girl who toddled around the pumpkin patch, holding his hand. The kid who fell asleep on Hagrid's sofa between them after bonfire night feasts. The first person he ever promised, out loud, "I'll protect you." Saving her means defending the youngest spark of the future he's building here. The proof that Hogwarts can be a home for children who grow up safe, not scarred. Fawkes's arrival and the sorting hat on his head don't bewilder him. They confirm a suspicion he's been growing for years. Hogwarts itself is on his side. The castle that watched him take his first steps in the Great Hall, that hid him and Hagrid from Ministry inspectors, is now sending its champions. A phoenix whose song feels like every warm night by the fire. A hat that once agreed he belonged in Gryffindor because he chose love over legacy. When he drives the basilisk fang into the diary, it isn't just Tom Riddle he's killing. It's the physical manifestation of the prejudice that expelled Hagrid, that would have left Harry in a cupboard, that whispers pure-blood supremacy through the pipes of this place he calls home. Venom sizzles, ink screams, and for a second, the chamber feels less like a tomb and more like an operating theatre. An ancient wound, finally being lanced. He emerges, soaked, bloody, clutching Ginny's hand and the ruined diary. And Hogwarts greets him not with a stranger's applause, but with a family's roar. This changes everything, because he hasn't only survived an encounter with a monster, he has literally purged a buried, hate-fueled relic from the foundations of the castle that raised him. He walks back into the light not just as a hero in a legend, but as a guardian of his home, a child of Hogwarts who has proven that the castle's future does not have to repeat its past. Year 3, a dog at the edge of the grounds, and a godfather he never knew. But peace doesn't last forever, even in the safest home you've ever known. By the time Harry turns 13, the castle that raised him is starting to feel a little too small. Not because Hogwarts has fewer secrets. If anything, he keeps finding new ones. But because he's growing up inside a place he's never really left. Other students write home about summers and siblings and Muggle cinemas. Harry measures his years in Quidditch seasons, in harvests from Hagrid's pumpkins, in how far he's allowed to follow the centaurs into the trees. This Harry has never had to long for Hogwarts. He's had to long for something beyond it. So when the Dementors arrive, they don't just guard a school, they invade his house. You can feel the violation, can't you? The train shuddering to a halt, the lamps going out, the cold pressing in. Except for Harry, it's not just fear of the dark. It's the sense that something foul has been invited onto the only ground that's ever felt like his. Those cloaked figures on the platform, stationed along the lake, mean that even the walk up to the front doors no longer belongs to him and Hagrid and the Thestrals. This isn't a story about a boy whose safe place is threatened from the outside. It's a story about what happens when the threat is allowed to stand on the very lawns he helped mow. And because he knows those lawns better than anyone, he's the first to notice the dog. Canon Harry spots the Grim in alleyways and stands. Our Hagrid-raised Harry knows every outline against the Forbidden Forest. Fang's lumbering shape, the centaur's proud silhouettes, the way a hippogriff's wings cut the sky. So when a huge black dog appears at the edge of the tree line one dusky evening, motionless, watching the gamekeeper's hut, he doesn't shrug it off as a trick of the light. He freezes with the feed bucket in his hands and thinks, that's new. The dog vanishes when he calls Hagrid, which only makes it worse, because now there is a mystery on the grounds and the grounds are his. At 13, the mysteries that haunt him are changing. He's heard more staff conversations than he's meant to, slipping down corridors after curfew, dozing in a chair in Dumbledore's office, while Hagrid argues about security. Names Sirius. The Order. Everyone seems to have a story about his parents except him. McGonagall's fond, tight-lipped anecdotes, Flitwick's proud mentions of dueling trophies, even Snape's bitten-off remarks. Each one proves the same thing. They lived whole lives in these corridors. Hogwarts remembers them. Harry doesn't. So when the Prophet headlines scream about Sirius Black's escape, Harry doesn't just see a madman on the run. He feels instinctively that Black is not out there in some abstract wizarding world. He's circling Harry's home. A name that's always been spoken in past tense is suddenly active, present, moving through the same wards and weather Harry has grown up under. This changes everything, because the idea of a traitor godfather isn't just tragic. It means betrayal is woven into Hogwarts' own history with him. On a storm-lashed night, he stands at the hut window, rain blurring the forest. Lightning forks and the black dog is there again, at the edge of the grounds, utterly still, staring back at him through the downpour. Harry's breath fogs the glass. Somewhere behind him, Hagrid snores, oblivious. For a long moment, it feels as if the castle itself is holding its breath. Watching these two figures measure each other across the soaked grass, guardian and intruder, boy and beast, family without knowing it yet. The next flash of lightning hits closer. When Harry blinks, the dog is gone. But the feeling that something is hunting the truth of his past, that doesn't leave. And as the Dementors close their ring around the school, Harry starts to wonder, is he being protected or contained? Dementors at the gates. When safety turns sour, the ring tightens. Not just of auras and wards and whispered rumors of Sirius Black, but of Dementors, those eyeless sentries that make even the stone of the castle feel afraid. And for a boy who has only ever really known one home, what does it mean when the guards at your gates make you feel less safe, not more? On the Hogwarts Express, that question arrives as a temperature drop. Canon gives us the cold, the breath misting, the scream in Harry's ears. But because this Harry has been raised in Hagrid's hut, that cold hits a different layer. He's grown up wrapped in dragon hide coats, 2 sizes too big, in tea that is always a bit too sweet, in the unspoken certainty that if anything came out of the forest, Hagrid would put his massive body between it and the boy in the corner bed. So when the lamps gutter and the door slides open, the chill isn't just fear. It's the sudden stripping away of that insulation. It's every night he woke from a nightmare to Hagrid's clumsy, reassuring hand being yanked out from under him. This isn't a story about a child discovering terror for the first time. It's a child discovering that terror can walk straight into the compartment of the safest train in the world. After that, the Dementors don't remain an abstract perimeter. They are silhouettes Harry can see from his window in the evenings, smudges against the sky beyond the pumpkin patch. Trips down to Hagrid's, which used to mean fresh bread, fangs, slobber, and gossip about nesting hippogriffs, now means scanning the tree line for a hooded tilt of the head. Quidditch practice becomes a test of divided attention. One eye on the snitch, one eye on the stands, remembering that last time they fell through the clouds toward him. And he is angry, not just shaken, not just sad, furious. At Dumbledore, who has always told him Hogwarts is home. At the Ministry, who sends soul-sucking guards to circle a school because it's easier than admitting Azkaban is a horror that breeds more horror. In this timeline, Harry remembers Hagrid hauled off to Azkaban in second year, remembers the hollow look in his father's eyes when he came back. How can anyone who saw that decide Dementors belong anywhere near children? This changes everything about how he hears Lupin's offer of help. The Patronus lessons aren't extracurricular magic. They're a lifeline. Here is an adult who doesn't say, "Be brave," and leave it at that. Lupin sees the boy who grew up under these towers, who knows every passage and password, but also knows what it means to be powerless when someone you love is taken. Their bond is sharpened by James, by shared stories of a man who once flew over this same lake, and by Hogwarts itself, the school both of them are trying to protect in their own way. Each silvery stag that bursts from Lupin's wand isn't just a demonstration, it's a promise that there is a way to push back. When Harry finally manages his own Patronus, it isn't only joy, it's relief so fierce it borders on rage. Because if the adults will not keep his home safe, he will. That decision, made in a dim classroom that smells of chocolate and old wood, hardens into something like policy. In the shrieking shack, in every corridor confrontation that follows, Harry isn't only fighting for his life or his godfather's name. He's fighting for the right of Hogwarts to be a sanctuary again, and that belief that a child has to be the one to enforce it will come with a cost. The Shrieking Shack revelation: family, betrayal, and choosing sides. So when Harry bursts into the Shrieking Shack in this timeline, he isn't stumbling into a haunted house from a bedtime story. He's walking into a place he's heard whispered about since he was small enough to ride in Hagrid's coat pocket. The shack has always been part of his mental map of Hogwarts, the place nearly Headless Nick warned him away from, the silhouette Hagrid pointed at on stormy evenings with a muttered, "Nothing in there you need to see, Harry." What if the most haunted building in Britain was never just a legend to him, but a locked door on the edge of his childhood? This changes everything when the door finally opens. And it isn't ghosts waiting, but Lupin and Sirius and a truth that has been circling him for years. Canon Harry meets these revelations as an outsider to the castle's inner life. This Harry grew up under its eaves. Lupin isn't just a good teacher who offers chocolate and quiet kindness. He's another adult who slipped seamlessly into the web of people who raised him. Sirius isn't just a gaunt stranger. He's the great black dog that watched him fly, that Hagrid jokingly called your shadow when he thought Harry wasn't listening. Realizing that two of his father's closest friends have been orbiting his life at Hogwarts, always there, never speaking, hits harder when Hogwarts itself has been his whole world. Because it doesn't feel like he was kept in the dark by accident. It feels deliberate, protective, infuriating. When Peter's treachery finally comes out, the betrayal is layered. Yes, this man sold his parents. But in this version, he also helped make Hagrid a suspect again, stirred old rumors about that dangerous half-giant and the boy he's corrupting, and put the school itself under ministry scrutiny. This isn't a story about abstract war crimes. It's about someone who nearly took Harry's only home away from him with a single lie. So when the wands are raised and Sirius is shouting for blood, Harry's choice to spare Peter is filtered through years of Hagrid's rough-edged compassion. He's seen the way Hagrid cradles a blast-ended Scroot, the way Dumbledore talks about choices over nature in staff room conversations Harry overhears from the stairwell. Dangerous doesn't mean disposable. Guilty doesn't mean you get to burn the whole world down around you. He hears himself say that they're not murderers, and it isn't just James's son speaking. It's the boy Hagrid, raised to see monsters as neighbors. For a moment, the reward for that mercy is dazzling. A cleared name, a godfather, a home that isn't a hut patched with magic and love, but a place of his own, beyond the grounds where he can still see the towers of Hogwarts from the window. You can almost feel him building it in his head. Weekends with Hagrid, dinners in the Great Hall, summers with Sirius. And then, of course, it collapses. Pettigrew escapes. The ministry refuses to listen. Sirius is swept away again, and the Shrieking Shack settles back into silence. But because that future is snatched away at the very moment it becomes real, Harry clings even harder to the one constant he has left. The castle, the staff, the fragile sanctuary he's sworn to protect. The boy who walked in chasing a murderer walks out knowing that Hogwarts isn't just where he lives. It's what his enemies will always try to take first. And the next time they come for it, he won't be 12 or 13 or half protected by ignorance. He'll be ready to break the rules of the story itself. Year 4, Triwizard in his backyard, and the politics of being Dumbledore's boy. So, when the Quidditch World Cup rolls around, This Harry doesn't spend the first half hour gaping at floating tents and self-stirring cauldrons. He's grown up watching the pitch reline itself and the stands rearrange for house matches. What catches his eye now isn't the magic, it's the ministry. He watches the way wizards in plum robes avoid looking at the Bulgarian minister's entourage, the way the Malfoys' box seats are 3 rows closer than the Weasleys, despite Lucius's supposed disgrace. He hears the mutter when Vila dance and leering men lose control, and he clocks which officials laugh it off and which ones go quiet and tight-lipped. This isn't a story about a boy dazzled by fireworks. It's a boy raised in Hogwarts' back garden, suddenly seeing how small his safe valley is compared to the storm outside. And when the dark mark burns over the campsite, it hits different. Canon Harry is terrified because the world he just entered erupts into chaos. Hagrid's Harry is terrified because the world he thought Dumbledore could control clearly isn't under anyone's control at all. He recognizes the skull and snake from whispered conversations cut short in staff rooms, from McGonagall's face when she thought he wasn't looking. This changes everything again, but now he's old enough to know it. So when the foreign schools arrive, he's already braced. What if Beauxbatons and Durmstrang don't just bring talent and tradition, but press and politics? They have. Within a day, the castle is humming. The boy who lived. The boy who lives here. The boy raised by a half-giant in a hut. For some visiting students, it's charming, almost fairy tale. You can imagine the whispers. Of course, Dumbledore tucked his weapon under his own eaves, raised by a man too loyal to question him. For others, it's scandal. A gamekeeper as guardian? A child raised without proper guardianship law? There are Durmstrang mutters about blood purity. Beauxbatons' parents sending owls home asking if Hogwarts is a school or an experiment. And the question under all the gossip is sharp. Has Dumbledore been grooming his champion all along? Harry hears pieces of this. Not all. Enough. And because he's 14 now, because he's been wheeled out at end-of-year feasts and tucked away when governors visit, the shine has worn off. He still loves Dumbledore. He still trusts him more than anyone outside his strange patchwork family of staff and creatures. But he's wary now, wary of being the moral of someone else's speech, wary of being volunteered. So when his name comes out of the goblet, it's not just shock. It's betrayal on a tectonic level. This isn't a distant magical artifact singling him out. This is Hogwarts' own fire, Hogwarts' own wards, spitting his name into the air. The castle that tucked him in, that hid him from reporters, that felt like the one neutral ground in a hostile timeline, has apparently decided he belongs in a deadly game, without asking. Pattern interrupt. Imagine being raised by a house choosing you, and then realizing it can choose you wrong. He looks up at the staff table, searching for the fixed point he's always had. McGonagall is white-lipped. Snape is unreadable. Hagrid looks half proud, half horrified. And Dumbledore's eyes aren't twinkling or furious. They're searching too. In that held breath between name and explanation, Harry understands something terrible. This time, even the headmaster doesn't know how to protect him. And the tournament isn't just happening at Hogwarts. It's happening to the boy Hogwarts raised. Tasks, dragons, and merpeople. A competitor who knows the grounds too well. Harry walks into the first task already knowing the smell of dragon smoke. He's seen Hagrid's sketchbooks, the clumsy charcoal outlines of Hungarian horntails and Swedish shortsnouts, heard bedtime stories that start with, "Now, ye must never try this, Harry," and end with Hagrid wrestling a tail the size of the hut. So when the stands roar and the horntail unfurls its wings, this Harry doesn't freeze because the creature is unimaginable. He freezes because the entire school is watching to see whether Hogwarts' own boy will fail on its front lawn. Canon Harry's fear is raw survival terror. Here, the terror is public. What if he disgraces the place that raised him? What if he proves every governor and Daily Prophet columnist right, that Hagrid was never fit to be guardian and Hogwarts never meant safety? This isn't a story about a child thrown to monsters. It's a story about a child who knows the monster is magnificent and still has to pretend he's not shaking as he mounts his broom. And because he's flown these skies since he was small, he uses the thermals he's learned from watching Thestrals and owls, skimming just out of flame range, reading the dragon's body language the way other students read textbooks. He doesn't outwit the horntail by accident. He outflies it because the grounds have been his playground and his classroom. The second task hits somewhere deeper. Harry has grown up watching the Black Lake through all its moods, from mirror-flat dawns on Hagrid's steps to storm-lashed nights when the giant squid's tentacles break the surface. He knows where the Grindylows cluster, where the reeds thicken, where Hagrid mutters about, "Right clever merfolk, ye treat 'em decent, and they'll treat ye decent back." So, what if he doesn't wait for a golden egg riddle to tell him there are merpeople? What if, weeks earlier, he's already been at the shoreline with a lantern and a thermos of tea, calling down respectfully in halting Mermish that Professor Flitwick helped him practice? This changes everything. The negotiations aren't smooth, but they're real. He doesn't bargain from ignorance. He bargains from long familiarity with the lake as an ecosystem, not a backdrop. By the time he dives in February, Harry isn't just racing a clock, he's entering a neighborhood where he's been a guest. The third task should be his home field advantage. Maze. He grew up in a castle that rearranges staircases for fun. He's navigated hidden corridors with Fred and George, memorized which forest paths lead toward centaurs and which toward acromantulas, learned to read the wind in the trees as a warning system. On paper, a hedged maze under starlight is just another extension of the grounds he knows by heart. Except it isn't. The magic here is hostile, deliberate, indifferent to the boy who once fed nifflers near these very pitch lines. The paths shift, the hedges breathe, the stars themselves feel wrong. His instincts say, the lake is that way, the forest is that way. The maze laughs and turns him around. For the first time, Hogwarts' magic isn't playful or protective. It's weaponized spectacle. And that's the quiet betrayal running under all three tasks. Every cheer in the stands cuts. Every staff member looking on, McGonagall, Hooch, even Snape, has watched him grow up here. They taught him to love this place, to trust its walls, its wards, its routines. Now those same adults sanction him being hunted, drowned, hexed, on the very grounds that were his childhood home. He feels it most in Hagrid's face, pride warring with terror, the man who tucked him into a camp bed outside the hut, now watching him walk voluntarily into Dragonfire. Because if Hogwarts is home, what does it mean when home signs the permission slip for your near death? That question detonates in the graveyard. The portkey isn't just a plot twist. In this timeline, it's the ultimate violation. The very magic that once floated him down moving staircases and opened secret doors to the kitchens now grabs him by the navel and hurls him away. One instant he's touching a Triwizard Cup on Hogwarts pitch, expecting the familiar Russian stop of school wards. The next, the air is colder, the stars are wrong, and the smell is not dragon smoke or lake water, but damp earth and decay. Hogwarts has spat him out. It hasn't merely failed to protect him. Its magic has been hijacked into the delivery system that carries its own child into a graveyard, built for his murder. So, when he lands hard among tombstones and realizes the cup was a portkey, the horror isn't only Voldemort's return. It's the shattering awareness that the place that raised him can now be turned against him. If a cup on the pitch can do this, what else in his home is waiting to be rewritten? And as a high, cold voice begins to speak, Harry understands something even worse. The war won't just come to Hogwarts. It will come through it, graveyard and aftermath, when home is no longer safe. Harry hits the graveyard ground, already knowing, in his bones, that something has gone fundamentally wrong with the story he thought he was living. Hogwarts was supposed to be the safest place in Britain. The tournament was supposed to be dangerous, yes, but contained. What do you do when the danger steps out of the maze and drags you off the board entirely? Canon gives us the horror of resurrection, the cauldron, the bone, the blood. Here, the horror is doubled, because every step is threaded with betrayal by a place he calls home. The Triwizard Cup isn't just a portkey, it's a Hogwarts artifact, blessed and inspected and paraded in front of the whole school. When that blue light wrenches him away, this Harry raised under the shadow of the towers, understands in one awful flash that the castle's protections mean nothing against a plot that uses the school's own traditions as a Trojan horse. He duels because he has to. He survives because years of racing the staircases, dodging bludgers, and sneaking through secret passages have trained his reflexes almost past thought, and because the ghosts and portraits and staff who practically helped raise him have drilled into him that you never turn your back on a fight like this. But as Priori Incantatem arcs between his wand and Voldemort's, the images that crowd his mind aren't just his parents. They're the Great Hall at breakfast, Hagrid's hut door, always open. The Quidditch stands roaring his name. This isn't a story about a boy ripped from a miserable suburb into a magical world. This is a story about a child who thought the magical world itself was his family, realizing it can hand him back to the man who murdered his parents. When he staggers back to Hogwarts with Cedric's body, the ambivalence hits like a physical blow. The castle is looming and familiar and wrong all at once. He's alive because of what Hogwarts gave him: friends, training, the instinct to protect. But the echo in his head is brutal. I only met that cup on Hogwarts ground. I only walked into that maze because my home told me it was safe. The staff feel it too. Hagrid's guilt is immediate and raw. He was on those grounds every day. He watched the hedges grow, checked the creatures, joked about the dragons. Why didn't he see the pattern? McGonagall's fury is diamond sharp, aimed first at the ministry officials who descend on the hospital wing, demanding statements before Harry's even fully conscious. Dumbledore, who has always seemed ageless to Harry, suddenly looks old, not theatrically frail, just worn, in the way of someone who realizes that raising Harry here hasn't just painted a target on one boy. It has painted a target on every corridor. And the ministry, of course, chooses denial. This changes everything for their narrative, because if Voldemort is back, then the headmaster who sheltered the boy who lived at Hogwarts was right all along. So the smear campaign mutates. Dumbledore isn't just alarmist, he's radicalizing Harry. He's used the castle to indoctrinate a vulnerable child against the Ministry. Why else, they insinuate in the prophet, would a boy who never lived a day in the Muggle world be raving about dark lords in graveyards? Harry hears all of this in snatches, whispered staff meetings, Hagrid's muttered curses, McGonagall's clipped reports. Each rumour drives the wedge deeper between the place that raised him and the people now saying that very upbringing makes him untrustworthy. So, let's explore that final image of the year. The leaving feast is over. Banners hang limp in the candlelight. Benches are pushed back, plates cleared, the echoes of laughter already fading into the enchanted ceiling's quiet stars. Harry stands alone in the middle of the great hall, the room where he learned to walk between tables, where Hagrid once lifted him onto the staff dais so he could see the sorting better, and he is suddenly, viscerally aware that every person he loves is tethered to this building. If war comes through Hogwarts again, it won't just be his life on the line. It will be Hagrid's and McGonagall's and the first years who wave at him in the corridors. The place that saved him as a baby may now be the reason they all die. And for the first time, Harry wonders whether staying home is the most dangerous choice he could make. Year 5. Umbridge versus the boy the castle raised. So when Dolores Umbridge arrives, it doesn't feel to Harry like a new teacher taking up a post. It feels like contamination. What if you'd grown up in an ecosystem where every stone, portrait, and tree has a personality, and then someone walks in and tries to fumigate the place? Her first speech in the Great Hall lands differently for a boy raised by the castle. All those syrupy phrases about ministry guidelines and orderly progress clang against the ancient magic he can feel humming in the walls. This Harry doesn't just roll his eyes at the platitudes. He feels the wards themselves bristle, the way the forest goes quiet before a storm. And then there's her office. In canon, it's ridiculous. Here, it's offensive. The pink doilies, the lace, the simpering cat plates. Harry experiences them as aesthetic violence. The hut he shared with Hagrid was cluttered and mismatched, but every object had a story. A kettle from McGonagall, a mended chair from Flitwick, a blanket from Molly Weasley. Umbridge's room is aggressively impersonal, a muggle dollhouse pasted over living stone. It means she's not just visiting Hogwarts, she's trying to overwrite it. So when she bans practical defense, when she nails educational decrees into the walls Harry used to trace with his fingers as a child, it feels personal in a way even detentions can't match. This isn't a story about a strict professor making school unpleasant. It's a story about an invasive authority trying to rewrite the culture of the only home he's ever known. Every hem is an assertion that the Ministry owns this place, owns its children, owns him. That's why the blood quill cuts deeper in this timeline, not only because of the pain, but because Harry can almost feel the castle flinch as his blood hits the parchment. He grew up learning that Hogwarts would protect him. Doors opening, staircases shifting, portraits warning him away from danger. Now the institution that was supposed to shelter him is being used as a weapon against its own. Dumbledore's army, then, isn't just resistance, it's home defense. When Harry leads Ron, Hermione, Ginny, Neville, and the others into the room of requirement, he's not only teaching spells, he's inducting them into the quiet, conspiratorial relationship he's always had with the building. The room responds to him like an old friend. Cushions for falls, dummies that look suspiciously like Ministry officials. shelves appearing exactly where he reaches. This changes everything about the DA's tone. They're not playing at rebellion. They're training as Hogwarts kids to protect their own corridors, their own first years, their own ghosts. Pattern interrupt. Watch the Weasley twins. In canon, their swamp is a glorious joke. Here, it's practically a magical organism. When they unleash it, Harry doesn't just laugh. He recognizes the move. The corridor floods with a semi-sentient marsh that refuses to be cleaned, clinging to banisters and archways like the castle itself is refusing to be sanitized. Filch rages, Umbridge fumes, but the staircases cooperate, routing students around her patrols through hidden shortcuts Harry showed them years ago. It feels to him as if the building is finally fighting back out loud through its children, the way he's been doing in secret his whole life. And then the forest. Umbridge thinks the grounds are hers to patrol. Harry knows better. When she drags him and Hermione beneath the trees, she's walking into territory that has raised him as surely as Hagrid has. Centaurs who remember a small boy bringing them apples, Thestrals who accepted his gentle hand long before he understood death, spiders who recognize the scent of the gamekeeper's hearth. All of them are part of his extended, dangerous family. So when the centaurs close in, it isn't just poetic justice, it's the grounds rejecting an infection. Harry doesn't control them. That's never been what this relationship means. But because he has grown up listening instead of conquering, he can speak just enough to turn their anger away from him and towards the true intruder. Umbridge vanishes into the forest's judgment. The pink, the plates, the decrees, all swallowed by trees that do not care about ministry seals. And Harry walks back toward the castle with the unnerving sense that, for now, his home has chosen him over the people who claim to govern it. Which raises a new, sharper question. If Hogwarts itself is willing to defy the Ministry, what happens when Voldemort tries to claim it again? The Department of Mysteries, leaving home to save it. Hogwarts has chosen him. The forest has backed him. So when the vision of Sirius writhing under Voldemort's wand slams into Harry's mind, it doesn't feel like a random nightmare. It feels like the war trying to rip away the last piece of home that isn't built of stone and wards. Canon Harry sees that corridor and thinks, trap or not, I have to go. This Harry, raised under Hagrid's roof and Dumbledore's shadow, reads it through an even sharper lens. Sirius isn't just a godfather in a photograph. He's the man who offered him a bed at Grimmauld, who joked about building a little hut on the grounds so Harry and Hagrid could both be his neighbors. He represents the only future in this timeline, where Harry might have a family address that isn't Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, CO the Gamekeeper's Hut. Losing Sirius means losing his last chance at a home beyond the castle walls. So when he decides to go to the Ministry, it isn't just reckless Gryffindor impulse. It's a rare, deliberate choice to leave his safest territory. He is stepping away from the wards, from Hagrid's kettle always on the boil, from the castle that has literally closed ranks around him. And he doesn't go alone. He takes his Hogwarts squad, Ron, Hermione, Ginny, Neville, Luna. The children who have grown up in these corridors with him, who learned to protect one another in empty classrooms and secret passageways. This isn't a story about kids wildly out of their depth. Because of the DA, they already know how to move as a unit, how to shout Protego for someone else before thinking of themselves. Years of sneaking down to Hagrid's, dodging Filch, and slipping through trick staircases have trained them to read architecture as battlefield. The Department of Mysteries is alien Echoing halls, whispering veils, impossible rooms. But watch how they adapt. They use shelves as cover the way they once used suits of armor. They weave through spinning doors with the same instincts they honed racing the moving staircases. This changes everything. The Ministry thinks it's luring children into a maze. In reality, it has invited Hogwarts-raised fighters into yet another strange wing of a very familiar game. And then Sirius falls. For a boy who watched Hagrid dragged to Azkaban, who almost saw the castle itself swallowed by pink proclamations, this loss hits on a deeper frequency. It is proof that no guardian is untouchable, no godfather guaranteed, no home, burrow, hut, or castle truly safe. The veil takes Sirius, but it also takes the illusion that Harry can keep the war outside the places he loves if he just runs fast enough. Back at Hogwarts, the stone feels different. He traces the grooves in the walls on the way down to Hagrid's, hears the lake lapping against the shore, and understands. These aren't shields that will hold forever. They're battlements waiting to be tested. What if the next vision isn't of a corridor in the Ministry, but of this very courtyard? So, let's explore what happens when Harry finally realizes that to protect his first home, he may have to turn it into a fortress and a battlefield. Year 6, Horcrux lessons in the headmaster's office. So when Dumbledore invites Harry to the office that September and says, very calmly, that their lessons this year will be private, focused, and dangerous, it doesn't feel optional. It feels like the moment the battlements call the boy who grew up inside them to the war. Canon Dumbledore brings Harry into the Horcrux secret late, almost grudgingly, as if confessing a mistake. Here, the confession is sharper, because this Dumbledore has kept Harry at Hogwarts on purpose. He has watched him chase gnomes with Hagrid, fall asleep over essays in the library, learn every secret staircase by heart. He has told himself year after year that he is doing it to protect the child fate marked. And now he has to say that protection has run out unless Harry helps shoulder the war. This isn't a story about a wise old mentor unveiling abstract dark magic theory. In that office, with the portraits muttering and Fawkes watching from his perch, every memory Dumbledore pours into the pensive lands on Harry as biography. Tom Riddle in the orphanage, Tom Riddle in the shop, Tom Riddle asking about Hogwarts founders. Each scene doubles as a guided tour of how Harry's home was turned into a battlefield long before he was born. When Dumbledore says the word Horcrux, Harry feels sick. When Dumbledore adds, quietly, that he believes one was hidden at Hogwarts, he feels something worse. Betrayal. Not of Dumbledore exactly, but of the very stones. What if the castle that raised him has been cradling a shard of the man who murdered his parents? What does it mean if the Great Hall, where he had his first cake and his first Christmas feast, has also been a vault for Voldemort's soul? This Harry, doesn't just imagine an unknown relic in an unknown corner. His mind races through a lived inventory, the room of requirement he's used since childhood as a playground and refuge. What if it once became a hiding place for something that poisons the air? The trophy room where he and Hagrid polished old plaques on rainy afternoons. Could one of those cups have hummed with a presence he was too young to name? Even the forest, his second backyard, feels suspect. Every glint in a hollow tree, suddenly a threat. This changes everything. Overnight, Harry becomes hyper-vigilant, not only because Dumbledore asks him to learn, but because he cannot bear the idea that his sanctuary has been complicit. He walks the corridors as if they're a patient he's monitoring, eyes snagging on every vanishing cabinet, every cursed music box, every tapestry that conceals a shortcut. The castle he once trusted implicitly becomes a mystery he is duty-bound to interrogate. And through it all, there is Dumbledore's hand, blackened, withered, shaking when he lifts the ring from the pensieve. The man who felt invincible enough to raise a child in a war zone now has to pause halfway up the stairs to his own office. The lessons are rich, terrifying, necessary, but under them runs an unspoken current. This headmaster is failing. So, let's explore the quiet, dawning realization that if Dumbledore falls, Hogwarts won't just be Harry's first home, it will be his command. The Half-Blood Prince, the hut, and a potion book. Command sounds grand until you're 16 half-blood and being courted by a retired potions master with crystallized pineapple. Horace Slughorn arrives to a Hogwarts where Harry isn't an awed newcomer, but part of the background machinery. This Harry has fetched tea from the staff room, watched exam papers marked, heard McGonagall and Flitwick argue about curriculum. So when Slughorn's eyes gleam at him in that ringed, appraising way, Harry recognizes it. Not just interest, acquisition. What if the boy who lived, raised under these very towers, became the crown jewel of the Slug Club? He's ambivalent from the start. On the one hand, he's used to being waved into staff spaces, used to Hagrid's booming pride and Sprout slipping him extra biscuits because he helped with the mandrakes. On the other, he has seen what it means when adults orbit power. He's watched ministry officials fawn over Dumbledore in June and undermine him by September. He knows how quickly admiration becomes leverage. So when Slughorn boasts about his famous former students and squeezes Harry's shoulder, Harry smiles and mentally counts exits. That same double vision shapes his relationship with the Half-Blood Prince's textbook. Canon Harry treats the scribbles as a clever peer's shortcuts. Our Hogwarts-raised Harry opens the book and feels immediately that this isn't student graffiti. The tight, economical handwriting, the way the corrections read not as cheats, but as marginalia. This is staff room energy. It feels like leafing through one of Snape's private lesson plans or McGonagall's transfiguration notes pilfered from her briefcase. This changes everything, because the line between pupil and authority has always been blurred for him. Bedtime stories from Hagrid, life lessons from McGonagall over Coco, Flitwick showing him wand movements in an empty classroom. The prince's book doesn't just make him better at potions. It tempts him with the illusion that he can think at a teacher's level, wield adult knowledge without adult responsibility. And then there's Draco. Growing up here means Harry knows the castle's veins and capillaries, which portraits gossip, which staircases sulk, which secret passages Filch actually uses. So when Draco starts vanishing from the usual Slytherin patterns, Harry notices the negative space. A door that should creak doesn't. Myrtle's bathroom goes quiet. The staff's rhythms hitch, Snape slipping away more often. Filch prowling with a tension Harry has only seen during inspections. Pattern interrupt. It isn't a hex or a near-death experience that finally checks him. It's Hagrid. He catches Harry coming back late. Prince's book under one arm, Marauder's map still clutched in ink-stained fingers. The hut feels suddenly small. Hagrid's voice is rough, not with anger but fear. Being raised here doesn't make Yare invincible. He tells him, these walls don't just protect Yare. They can trap Yare. And the people in them, me, the professors, We're not just your allies, we're targets. You charging around makes a bigger bullseye on all of us. This isn't a story about a boy and his castle against the world. It's a story about a boy realizing the castle is full of adults who can be broken. So, let's explore the moment that realization crystallizes. Late at night, Harry unfolds the Marauder's map. He watches his own dot in Hagrid's hut, then tracks Draco Malfoy pacing in the room of requirement, in and out, as if wearing a groove in the very stone. 2 names, 2 children, both moving according to patterns laid down by men who won't be here forever. And Harry finally understands. Inside these same walls, both he and Draco are being used. Different sides, same game. Astronomy Tower. Losing the man who chose Hogwarts for him, Draco pacing in the room of requirement, is one half of the pattern. The other half begins the night Harry walks out of Hogwarts, at Dumbledore's side. In canon, that boat ride to the cave is already tense. Here, it's worse, because this Harry knows what it means to take the headmaster away from the castle. Once, Dumbledore carried Harry toward Hogwarts, cradled in Hagrid's arms, choosing the castle as his cradle and his shield. Now Harry is the one leaving with him, watching the silhouette of the turrets shrink against the sky and thinking, with a kind of sick superstition, this is backwards. What if the wards need him? What if the man who built Harry's whole world is walking out of its frame? The cave mission becomes a dark mirror of his origin story. No Hogsmeade novelty, no awe at side-along apparition. Harry's cataloguing every risk, every gap in the plan, because growing up in the shadow of those walls has taught him what Hogwarts can usually protect him from, and what it can't. He remembers Hagrid's tales of the Founders, McGonagall's quiet assurances that as long as Dumbledore is here, the school will stand. And he is very aware that, for the first time since he was 1 year old, Dumbledore is choosing to leave Harry's home exposed. On the Astronomy Tower, when it all breaks, this isn't a story about a mentor dying in front of his student. It's the collapse of the decision that defined Harry's entire life. Snape's spell throws Dumbledore from the battlements. But what really shatters is the idea that the man who put him in Hagrid's hut, who made Hogwarts his family's extension, can go on orchestrating this war from a safe, elevated distance. The tower where Harry used to watch the stars with Hagrid, learning constellations badly mispronounced, laughing in the cold, becomes the place where he watches the person who chose Hogwarts for him fall away from it. Down in the aftermath, the adults' reactions land differently on a boy raised among them. McGonagall isn't just a strict professor. She's the stern aunt who corrected his grip on a broom, who smuggled him extra porridge when Hagrid burned breakfast. Seeing her stand in the ruined courtyard, lips pressed so thin they almost vanish, voice scraped raw as she organizes patrols, means Harry sees not authority, but someone trying to hold together the roof over their shared childhood. And Hagrid. In canon, his sobs are heartbreaking. Here, they are unbearable, because this is the man who carried baby Harry across the lake, who tucked him into a camp bed by the fire, who has always believed Dumbledore could fix anything. When Hagrid's shoulders shake over Dumbledore's body, when he chokes on the words, he trusted Snape, Harry isn't just grieving a headmaster. He's watching his guardian lose the friend who vouched for him, the anchor that made their unconventional family possible. Around them, the staff move like a stunned flock, Sprout with dirt still under her nails from reinforcing greenhouse wards. Flitwick's wand hand trembling as he relocks doors that have already been breached. These are the adults who raised him by committee, and they are suddenly, unmistakably leaderless. And that, more than the dark mark over the tower, tells Harry the truth. Hogwarts is no longer a sanctuary. Death Eaters have walked the corridors he once toddled down, holding Hagrid's hand. They have stood in the entrance hall where he took his first flying lesson, where Dumbledore once told him, gently but firmly, that the castle would always be his home. This changes everything, because if war can reach the very heart of his growing up, then there is nowhere left to retreat to. At the funeral, standing between Hagrid's massive, shaking form and McGonagall's rigid, white-knuckled composure, Harry feels the wards of his childhood falling away. The white tomb gleams by the lake, where he skipped stones as a little boy, where Dumbledore once sat beside him and explained in broad strokes why some children must carry heavier destinies. Now that man is gone, and the protection he represented is gone with him. So when Rufus Scrimgeour prowls the edges of the ceremony, when whispers ripple through the crowd about closing the school, Harry understands something brutal and simple. If Hogwarts cannot be made safe, then clinging to it is no longer love, it's denial. He thinks of the prophecy of the Horcrux hunt Dumbledore began in that cursed cave, of the fact that the war has already walked his corridors and climbed his tower. Leaving will feel like abandoning a parent. It will feel like betraying Hagrid's faith and McGonagall's endless patience. But because Dumbledore chose Hogwarts for him once, Harry now chooses to walk away from it, not in rejection, but in defense. If the source of the war lies beyond these grounds, then that is where he has to go. He doesn't yet know that the castle itself isn't finished with him, that its walls, its secrets, and its ghosts still have one last role to play in this timeline. He only knows that when he steps away from Dumbledore's tomb, he is stepping out of childhood. And somewhere deep in the stone, in the room that has watched Draco Pace and Harry hide, Hogwarts is already shifting, waiting to decide whether it will let its lost son go so easily. Year 7 without Hogwarts, a homeless hero on a Horcrux hunt. He has dreamed about leaving Hogwarts before, sneaking onto a dragon, vanishing into the forest, taking the secret paths only he and Hagrid know. But when it finally happens, when he shoulders the rucksack, turns his back on the gates, and walks, this doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like exile. Canon Harry leaves a school he's known for 6 years. This Harry is walking away from the only home he remembers, the place where he learned to walk on stone flags and to read by wandlight at Hagrid's table. He isn't being forced out by a term ending or a barred train. He's choosing to go. And because he's choosing, every step down that road feels like a betrayal of the castle that raised him. This isn't a story about a boy suddenly thrown into camping. The tent is new. The life isn't. Harry knows how to move quiet through trees because the forest taught him. He knows which mushrooms are safe because Sprout sighed and showed him after he turned up in the hospital wing twice. He can read claw marks on bark, scat on leaves, the way birds fall silent before a predator. Out here, those Hagrid-taught instincts mean they don't die in the first week. But because every crack of a twig sounds almost right, every gust of wind through unfamiliar branches hurts. It's never the right smell of pine, never the exact way the forbidden forest hums with old magic. The skills that protect them also haunt him. Each successful warding charm, a reminder that he learned to cast it on a lawn overlooking the lake. In the cramped canvas world of the tent, Hogwarts becomes their unit of measurement. A creek with biting insects. Still better than second-floor girls' loo, Ron mutters. A cursed fog rolling over a valley. Hermione compares it to Dementors on the Quidditch pitch. They catalogue dangers by castle reference. Worse than the troll, not as bad as Aragog, different to the chamber. Even out here, the story they tell themselves about survival is written in corridors and classrooms, and the forest's shadow. And layered over the tense, stale air, there's another presence. Hogwarts in his head, flickering through Voldemort's Horcrux-twisted visions. He sees the Great Hall banners turned Slytherin green, Carrows stalking the aisles where he once spilled pumpkin juice, Snape's silhouette on the staff table like a cutout of Dumbledore's absence, detentions in the dungeons that feel less like discipline and more like training sessions for future Death Eaters. The place that raised him repurposed as a prison. It's a slow-motion nightmare. He recognizes every stone and can't touch any of them. When they piece together that one Horcrux is hidden in Hogwarts itself, it lands differently for this Harry. It doesn't just mean a tactical return. It means the war has reached into his nursery, his first classroom, Hagrid's hut. To win, he won't only have to break into a fortified school, he will have to walk back into his own childhood and decide what survives. So, let's explore what it costs when coming home is part of the battle plan. The Battle of Hogwarts, defending the only home he's ever known. He doesn't come back through the gates as a student sneaking home for one last adventure. He comes back as a soldier, walking into the house where he learned to walk, knowing every doorway might be the next place he has to make a stand. This isn't a story about a nostalgic return to school. It's about what it means when your childhood bedroom, your first classroom, the hut where you were rocked to sleep, are all on the front line. Canon Harry comes back to Hogwarts because it's where the Horcrux is and where the final act belongs. This Harry comes back because if the castle falls, he is watching his own upbringing be burned down in real time. You can feel it in the way people look at him. They don't just see the chosen one. They see the boy who used to trail after Filch's broom, the kid who knew which house elf would sneak him treacle tart when Hagrid forgot to eat, the child Madame Pomfrey patched up after his first tumble off a school broom at age 5. When McGonagall rallies the staff, there's steel in her voice, yes, but there's also something almost maternal. We are not losing the child we raised to this war. So when the DA gathers, it isn't just awe, it's recognition. The Hufflepuff who once watched tiny Harry feed the Strauss with Hagrid now watches him outline battle plans. The Ravenclaw who helped him reach a book in the library years ago now takes orders on patrol routes. This changes everything about how they rally. They're not just following a symbol, they're protecting family. And as he hunts the Ravenclaw Horcrux, every corridor is a memory minefield. The hidden staircase behind the tapestry isn't just a shortcut. It's where he and Hagrid used to race up to bring Fang to the infirmary. The unused classroom where he checks the cupboards is the place Professor Flitwick once let him practice swish and flick until his arm ached. Even the room of requirement responds differently. It doesn't only become what he needs, it becomes what he remembers needing. Crates of creature care manuals, a battered toy broom, a corner that smells faintly of Hagrid's pipe and rock cakes. The castle itself seems to rise with him. Statues don't just march because McGonagall commands them. They turn their stone heads as Harry passes, as if recognizing the child who used to climb their plinths. Suits of armor echo with the memory of his small hands, tracing their gauntlets. When he runs, doors open a heartbeat faster. Staircases swing into place as though Hogwarts is choosing, very deliberately, to protect the boy it helped raise. And then, there is the forest. In canon, it's a place of fear and penance. Here, it's also his backyard. The line of trees is where Hagrid taught him to tell harmless rustling from predator silence, where he learned that monsters were often just misunderstood neighbors. Walking into its heart to face Voldemort isn't leaving safety, it's stepping deeper into the oldest part of his home. He crosses the grounds past Hagrid's hut, past the pumpkin patch where he once chased gnomes, and every step is a goodbye. Not to life, exactly, but to childhood. Because to save the place that raised him, he has to offer up the child it raised. What happens when the forest that watched him grow now watches him fall? That's where this timeline turns, and where the next part of our story has to go. After the forest, resurrection, victory, and rebuilding a broken home. The forest swallows him and then gives him back. When Harry walks into the Great Hall again, it is not as a student returning from detention or a boy sneaking in after curfew. It is as someone who has already died once, crossing a threshold that has framed every version of his growing up. This is the room where he watched the ceiling snow on his first feast, where a giant of a man once handed him a letter that changed his timeline forever. Now it's the room where Voldemort falls. Canon gives us that final confrontation, of course, but here the space itself is louder, because this Harry knows every flagstone by heart. He knows which corner Hagrid pointed out his first sorting, where he and the first years huddled in awe, which patch of wall he leaned against when he realized Hogwarts wasn't just a school. It was the only home he'd ever had. So when wands rise and curses fly, he's not just defending people. He's defending corridors he learned to toddle down, tables he once polished as a punishment, the staff table where McGonagall slipped him an extra roast potato when Hagrid wasn't looking. And when Voldemort's body finally hits the floor, the silence that follows isn't clean. The Great Hall becomes something strange, something canon only gestures at, a war zone and a family living room occupying the same enchanted space. Benches are overturned, banners scorched. Madame Pomfrey moves between clusters of the injured with brisk, furious tenderness. McGonagall stands straight-backed and shaking, barking orders in a voice that has soothed nightmares. A Ravenclaw sobs into a Hufflepuff's shoulder. House elves, hands trembling, scrub blood from stones they once polished for start-of-term feasts. This isn't a story about everyone simply going home for the summer. Where would Harry even go? Privet Drive never existed for him. The Burrow is a place he visits, not a legal address. Grimmauld Place is a tomb. What if, when the dust settles, he realizes there is only one option that feels true? He stays. He stays in the days after the battle, not as a hero on a victory tour, but as Hagrid's boy with a toolkit, a wand, and far too much experience of broken walls. We see him on a scaffold, helping Flitwick recharm shattered windows, in the corridor outside the kitchens, crouched to eye level with terrified first years, explaining in simple, steady words that the war is over and Hogwarts will protect them. He carries rubble. He carries messages. He carries, awkwardly but earnestly, the weight of other people's grief. And Hagrid has to look at him differently now. Not instead of love, but on top of it. He remembers the baby he tucked into a drawer lined with blankets in his hut, because there wasn't a proper cot yet. He remembers the toddler who fed Fang biscuits and tried to toddle into the forest after a unicorn. but because this is the boy who walked into death and came back. Hagrid is suddenly the guardian of a child who became a general. There's guilt there. Did teaching him to face down acromantulas make it easier to face down an army? Did raising him in a castle under siege train him for this, or steal from him the right to be afraid? This changes everything about how Hagrid measures his own success. It's not just, did he keep Harry alive? It's, did he keep Harry a person? So we end this stretch of the story not in a blaze of glory, but in quiet. Dawn seeps through the repaired, still flickering windows of the Great Hall. Harry sits alone on the steps just outside. The same steps where he once waited for Hagrid to take him to Diagon Alley. Boots muddy, eyes too big for his face. Now his boots are blood-stained, and his eyes are older. But for the first time, he lets himself imagine a future here that isn't a battlefield. He imagines first years arguing over houses instead of casualty lists. He imagines Hagrid complaining about gnomes in the pumpkin patch and detentions for sneaking into the kitchens, not patrol schedules. He imagines the Great Hall ceiling showing nothing more dangerous than a thunderstorm. What if rebuilding Hogwarts isn't just masonry and magic, but teaching a boy who grew up in a fortress to believe in a school again? So, let's explore how a home rebuilt from ruins reshapes the next chapter of this war-torn family. Identity, belonging, and the long view. If you grow up in a fortress, what does leaving home even mean? If the first lullaby you remember is the creak of the Forbidden Forest and the crackle of the Great Hall fires, where do you go when the war is over? Canon Harry steps out into adulthood with one foot always outside the castle. He becomes an Auror, commutes to a ministry office, visits Hogwarts as an alumnus who walks the corridors with that familiar ache of distance. He names his children after mentors and martyrs because his identity is a patchwork of people who stepped in when no one else did. He belongs to the school, yes, but also beyond it. This Harry has never known a world where Hogwarts wasn't his address. The castle is not the place he escaped to. It is the place that raised him. That changes how he imagines the future. When McGonagall asks, "What will you do now, after the battle?" Canon Harry can say, "I think I'll sleep," and mean a world beyond term dates. Here, the question hits differently. Where else would he go? So, what if the answer is, he doesn't? This isn't a story about a boy who finally leaves the abusive house on Privet Drive and never looks back. This is a story about someone who has to decide what it means to grow up without walking away from the stones that kept him alive. One version of this timeline has him step almost naturally into the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom. He has been informally teaching since he could walk the battlements with Hagrid, since he learned which suits of armor like to trip you and which secret passages are safe in a siege. As a professor, he is the bridge between terrified first years and a history of war he refuses to romanticize. He teaches Patronuses in third year not because the curriculum demands it, but because he remembers what it was to be hunted. Another future keeps him closer to the earth. Imagine Harry as Hagrid's successor, the official keeper of keys and grounds, the boy who once fed hippogriffs, now overseeing a sanctuary of two dangerous creatures. He advocates for werewolves and giants with the same stubborn tenderness Hagrid once used on him. The Ministry tries to regulate his herd of acromantulas. He files meticulous, exasperating reports until they give up. Or he becomes a formal liaison, living in a tower office that overlooks both the lake and a flu-connected ministry room. He spends his days arguing for ward funding, for trauma-informed policies, for protections that would have saved Colin Creevey and Lavender Brown. Means the boy who grew up under Dumbledore's nose now stands in front of the Wizengamot and says, "You will not use these children as symbols without protecting them." Because he belongs to Hogwarts so completely, he is slower to leave Britain, more anchored to the castle than Canon Harry ever could be. His friendships and romances bend around term cycles and rebuilding projects. Ginny, Neville, Hermione, anyone who loves him in this world has to love a man who flinches at the idea of moving on, if it sounds like moving away. The original series is about escaping a bad home, finding a better one, then defending it. Here, the bad home never happens. The flawed but beloved one is there from the start, cracked and drafty and sometimes dangerous, but his. The arc shifts from flight to stewardship, from where do I belong to how do I heal what already claimed me. And in this timeline, when we repeat that famous line, Hogwarts will always be there to welcome you home, it isn't a promise about Christmas breaks and reunions. It is a literal life story. The place that took him in as a baby, that he bled for as a teenager, is the place he chooses, again and again, as an adult. The boy under the sorting hat becomes the man who tends the hat's shelf, which raises one last question. When the castle finally doesn't need defending, who is Harry Potter without a war to fight in the only home he's ever known? The ripple effects, Dumbledore, Hagrid, Snape, and the wizarding world. It turns out, if Harry's whole life is braided into Hogwarts, then no one around him gets to stay the same. You can't tuck the boy who lived into a hut by the pumpkin patch and expect canon personalities to remain untouched. Start with Dumbledore. In the original timeline, he can pretend distance is wisdom, that leaving Harry with the Dursleys is a regrettable necessity. Here, that illusion evaporates. He walks past Hagrid's door every morning. He hears a toddler crying after nightmares about green light. He watches Harry wobble on a toy broom over the pumpkin patch and knows, with painful clarity, that he has raised a weapon in the shadow of his own tower. This changes everything, not because he becomes less manipulative, but because the manipulations are no longer abstract. They are conversations at Hagrid's table, arguments about danger and destiny that feel uncomfortably like co-parenting. This Harry doesn't see Dumbledore as a distant, twinkly legend. He sees the man who decided he would grow up in a castle instead of a family home, the man who sends him back to lessons after a Dementor attack, because the term must go on. Their relationship bends toward a flawed, complicated guardianship, where Harry can push back earlier, ask harder questions, and where Dumbledore's guilt is a daily, living thing rather than a late revelation in a King's Cross limbo. And what about Hagrid? This isn't a story about a marginal groundskeeper who occasionally smuggles a dragon egg into a pub. Making him Harry's guardian drags him into the center of wizarding society, whether he wants it or not. Suddenly, the man Malfoy calls a savage is testifying at ministry hearings about educational welfare. Because the question isn't theoretical anymore. Is Hogwarts a safe place to raise a child? The prophet runs profiles on him. Parents whisper on platform 9 3/4. Hagrid, who has always carried shame about his expulsion, now has to stand up straighter, because every insult to him is an insult to Harry's home. Snape, meanwhile, doesn't get the luxury of a single shocking moment at the sorting feast. He gets 11 years of glimpses, a small boy chasing Fang, a messy head bent over a toy wand in the courtyard, Lily's eyes peering at him from behind Hagrid's leg. What if the child he's sworn to protect is also the child he's quietly resented for a decade? Because he can't avoid Harry, his bitterness can't stay theoretical. Maybe he softens in strange, sideways ways, an extra dry remark instead of outright cruelty, a silent countercurse cast from the shadows when a hippogriff rears. Or maybe his self-hatred deepens, making every later sacrifice feel less like atonement and more like inevitability. The wider world adjusts too. The boy raised at Hogwarts becomes a talking point in Wessingham debates about school funding and security. Was Dumbledore right to keep Harry in the eye of the storm? Did growing up among professors and centaurs make him a better protector, or prove that the headmaster blurred every boundary between childhood and war? When the war ends and commissions convene to judge Dumbledore's legacy, Harry isn't just Exhibit A of prophecy. He's Exhibit A of experimental education policy. And all of it, all these ripples through careers and headlines and late-night arguments in the staff room, come back to one quiet what if. One baby not left on a suburban doorstep. One choice to trade blood wards for castle walls. The question, as we move into the end of this timeline, is simple and terrifying. If you raise your savior in the very heart of the world he's meant to protect, what happens when that world asks him to finally put it down? Why this version hurts and heals differently. Because here's the uncomfortable truth this timeline forces us to sit with. Taking Harry out of the cupboard doesn't take him out of danger. It just trades one kind of peril for another, one kind of loneliness for a different, more public kind of exposure. In canon, Harry's childhood is invisible. He's starved, belittled, and shut away. But the wider world doesn't see him until he's 11. In the Hagrid at Hogwarts version, there is no cupboard, no Dudley pounding on the door, no barred window. There is a drafty hut, a place at the staff table, a castle full of portraits who know his name. He is not anonymous. He's the boy every first year whispers about, long before he's old enough to sit their exams. That means more love. Yes, Hagrid's fierce, clumsy devotion, McGonagall's watchful eye, even the house elves sneaking extra treacle tart. But it also means more danger, because every pair of eyes on him is a potential threat or expectation. This isn't a story about fixing Harry's life so it finally becomes easy. It's a story about changing the angle of the wound. Growing up in the heart of Hogwarts means he's safer from belts and thrown frying pans, but closer to cursed artifacts, secret chambers, and the man who murdered his parents. He learns to fly years earlier, learns the feel of the forbidden forest paths before he learns long division. That confidence comes with a heavier burden of responsibility, pressed onto his shoulders not at 11, but at 8, at 9, whenever a crisis erupts and everyone turns instinctively toward the gamekeeper's boy who belongs to the castle. And isn't that what so many of us secretly want to rewrite? We look at Privet Drive and think, what if someone had rescued him? What if Dumbledore had chosen care over blood wards? This AU answers that desire, but because it is honest, it refuses to stop there. It insists that even in a world where Hagrid tucks Harry in after nightmares, pain finds new roots. The Mirror of Erised doesn't show a family he's never known. It shows a family scattered across the castle, never all together, always on duty. The chamber isn't a one-off plunge into horror. It's a violation of what has always been his home, a basilisk slithering through the only corridors he's ever trusted. Pattern interrupt. Think about Umbridge. In canon, she invades his school. Here, she invades his childhood house. Her quill doesn't just cut into a student. It carves into the boy Hagrid raised under Dumbledore's nose, turning the very institution that raised him into a weapon. And the Battle of Hogwarts? It isn't just a last stand at school. It's war in his backyard, giants trampling the pumpkin patch, where he learned to plant seeds. Death Eaters shattering the front doors that were, quite literally, his front doors. This changes everything about the hero he becomes. Canon Harry is shaped by neglect into a boy who will throw himself away because he's never been taught his own worth. This Harry is shaped by relentless visibility and communal love. He doesn't want to die because it will break the only family he's ever had. But he will walk into the forest because home has taught him that protecting others is what love demands. So, let's explore the cost of that. Neither life is better in any simple, comforting sense. One gives him anonymity and abuse, the other affection and exposure. One forges a hero who fights because he has nothing. The other forges a hero who fights because he has everything to lose. The scars are different, the strengths are different, but the ache in both versions is real. And that's where the bittersweetness lives. In saving Harry from the Dursleys, we've made Hogwarts both sanctuary and battleground, nursery and war zone. We've given him a childhood full of magic and taken away any illusion that home can ever be untouched by conflict. Sitting with that tension, wanting to rescue him, knowing we can't spare him, is precisely what makes this what if so powerful as we head into the final movements of this story. If you lived in the hut, inviting your own what ifs. In saving Harry from the Dursleys, we've put him in the hut by the lake. And now, before we leave him there, this is where we hand the story to you. What if you lived in that hut too? At least in your imagination. What if you could walk back through this entire timeline and drop this Harry, into the tiny canon moments we'd barely touched? Flying lessons with Madam Hooch when he's already spent years chasing roosters away from hippogriffs. Detention in the forbidden forest where the centaurs know him by name. Yule Ball preparations where his problem isn't finding a date, but figuring out which older student Hagrid has roped into teaching him how to knot a tie. This isn't a story about changing the big battles only. This changes everything in the margins. So, think about first-year brooms, but with a boy who's already flown on a battered school broom Hagrid borrowed on quiet summer afternoons. Think about detentions with Snape, where Harry has childhood memories of watching him cross the grounds in the rain. Think about Hogsmeade weekends, where home isn't a distant village, but the smoky warmth of Hagrid's fire just beyond the gates. And then there are the character questions. The ones we can't fully answer alone. Would this Harry forgive Dumbledore more easily because he grew up seeing the old man as a constant presence rather than a distant chess master? Or does discovering the truth about the prophecy cut deeper precisely because it came from someone he trusted as a grandfather who let him sleep within Hogwarts walls? Would he and Snape ever reach a truce if Snape watched him grow up, half Lily's eyes and half Hagrid's muddy boots, tracking footprints through the dungeons? Follow that thread further. Does he stay on the grounds as an adult, stepping into Hagrid's role as gamekeeper or care of magical creatures professor, protecting the next generation the way the castle protected him? Or does he have to move away from the lake to figure out who he is when Hogwarts isn't his nursery, his battlefield, and his only home all at once? If you want to keep playing in this what if, spin it out. What if McGonagall had co-parented with Hagrid, transfiguring high chairs in the staff room and teaching toddler Harry his first controlled animagus-adjacent tricks? What if Madame Pomfrey had been the one to insist on bedtime and vegetables? Or, on the darker side of this timeline, what if after second year the ministry had stepped in, declared the hut unfit, and forced Harry into a foster home for his own protection, ripping him away from the only family he remembers? Tell us your version. In the comments, map out the scenes we missed, the arguments, the reconciliations, the detentions that turned into turning points. Would your hut-raised Harry be gentler or wilder, more forgiving or more furious? Where does he end up when the war is over? If you want more long-form, emotionally grounded Harry Potter AUs, more timelines where a single choice means a different kind of family and a different kind of love, liking, subscribing, and sharing is how we keep exploring them together. It's not about chasing numbers. It's about building a table long enough to fit every what if. Because somewhere, in a different version of the story, a boy is falling asleep to the sound of the lake against the shore and a giant humming off key. And that too is a kind of magic.